Okay, we're back making another pass at this live broadcast. Making another try at my first live stream. This live streaming is hard.
Deep in the heart of whispering pines and sun-dappled waters lived Grandpa Hank, a man carved by time.
So I'm playing a video on my computer.
His days were a quiet harmony.
That you can watch
the gurgle
on
of
the
current,
desktop.
the rustle of leaves, the creak of his rocking chair. Although the melody of his life was incomplete, a connection lost,
the vertical
a harmony
feed, you're
missing.
pretty much just
One
going to
day,
see
a
me.
change that was on the horizon arrived. An unyielding individual who clung to his independence. Nevertheless, a glimmer of optimism appeared amid the tension. Grandpa Hank, noticing the yearning in Rosemary's eyes and the lost light in Max's gaze, suggested that they go fishing for a week. This would be an opportunity to reconnect with one another and to repair what had been damaged. Rosemary and Max were reluctant but agreed. They were serious about mending the relationship. Max found himself attracted to the world of casting lines and waiting for the tug, even though he initially displayed hostility to the idea. His negative attitude was gradually chipped away by the combination of the excitement of setting the hook, the patience that was required to reel in a catch, and the calm respect they had for the species they encountered. To lighten his stern demeanor, Grandpa Hank told his grandson stories about his previous catches and the lessons he had learned while fishing. This helped him form a connection with his grandson via their mutual appreciation for the art of fishing and the knowledge it contained. Max patiently waited for a bite and finally felt like he had the hang of it, casting his line with practiced ease. Max, who was used to the quick pace of the city, found himself calming down and absorbing the rhythm of the river. As the sun warmed their faces, they waited, the river uttering secrets to them.
I'm playing a video,
Max
one of my
curved
videos,
sharply.
while I'm live
It was with all of
streaming,
his strength that he growled and
kind of
pulled
hoping
back.
it'll
The line sung,
fill in
dangling the
the gaps where
possibility
I
of breaking. It's a
stutter
river
and
monster, he
don't talk
shouted, his
correctly.
eyes widening in alarm.
And also
Grandpa Hank,
help
who was
promote
known
this
for his
video.
unwavering composure, immediately
I'm
took
also
action. He
streaming
assisted Max in
on the
adjusting
phone,
the drag,
on the
and his
short
weathered
feed.
hands guided him through the
And
process. Alongside one
I think
another,
you can see
men
the
and fish engaged
monitor
in
out
a
the
war
corner.
that was conducted in
But
silence.
I spun it
Max's
around and it
muscles
looked to
were
me
showing
like
signs
the
of effort,
letters
and
were
sweat
backwards.
was trickling down his forehead. As it moved across the water, the line was like a silvery streak against the color blue. At the same moment that Max was beginning to believe that he could no longer pull,
welcome
the
to
fish
my
finally
first live
broke the
stream.
surface. It was a tremendous
Hopefully I won't
size.
mess it up too
The
bad.
catfish was about the
But I'll tell
size
ya,
of a young
this
child,
live streaming is
and
hard.
its skin shimmered in the sunlight.
It is not
Its
nearly
whiskers
as easy
looked like
as
knotted ropes.
it looks on
Wow,
YouTube.
Max gasped, startled, and his voice trembled. Rosemary, Max's mom, kept
I
encouraging
actually had to
him.
make notes.
Grandpa laughed heartily. Please don't rush things, son. This fish can fight.
But I'd like
they
your
went
feedback
on fighting.
on this
Their
live
combined
stream. Like,
strength
is the
overwhelming
lighting
the fish's
okay?
power.
Can
They
you
fought
hear
the
me?
fish in a measured
Is the
manner,
microphone
inch
all
by
right?
inch for the most part. It was with a loud splash that the giant catfish
Do you like
made
the
his
fact that
landing
I'm
in the
playing
boat.
a
He
video
was
on the
amazing,
desktop
a
while
creature
I'm
of
live
mythology
streaming on
right
the
there in their
desktop?
hands. He was a monster without equal.
Or would you just
Max
rather
and
have me
Grandpa
talk?
gave each other high fives while bursting with delight. It wasn't just about the catch.
The video
it was
that
about
I'm
the
playing
fight
is a
that they all went
compilation
through together
of fishing
and the victory
story
that they gained
videos
together.
that
A
are on
melody
my
of
channel.
connection that reverberated far beyond the water was created by their laughter
Hello,
at
Brylan.
that very time. And
Hello,
it echoed
Katie.
through the river.
Glad to see you guys. Wait, gotta skip this ad playing on the video.
There was a fresh link, a chance at healing, and a family that was finally finding
This is
its
my
rhythm.
first live
The
stream,
huge catfish
so
was released into the river.
it's a whole
but
lot
something
harder
much
than it
more
looks.
valuable had been caught. The triumph
Them
of
YouTube
landing a
guys
trophy
make this look
catfish
easy.
echoed in their laughter around the crackling campfire. The shared experience had chipped away at the walls between them, revealing a wellspring of stories, jokes, and warm memories. Max, no longer guarded, spoke of his struggles, his yearning for independence intertwined with a deep need
This
for
whole
love and
YouTube
belonging.
thing,
Rosemary, seeing the
I really like
vulnerability beneath his
because
tough
what I do
experience,
is I go
recognized the
fishing,
love hidden
I
behind
write off my
Grandpa
mileage,
Hank's
and then I can go
roughness,
fishing for
the
free.
unspoken ache for a
So
closer
I'm
connection.
not under the kind
As they
of pressure
reflected
that a
on
lot
their
of people
successful
are.
catch, they communicated with
it's
one
still
another
pretty
in a low
frustrating.
voice. After
Like,
Max's initial
I'll
arrogance,
write a
he
script,
eventually came to respect the
edit,
creature's
really
might
do a
and
good
saw
job,
the
think,
importance
man,
of
this is the
working
greatest
together.
video
The
ever.
harsh directions that Grandpa Hank had given
Upload
his
it,
grandson
flops like a
eventually
pancake.
transformed into patient
But
advice.
the other day, I
and
was
his eyes
fishing at
filled with
Taylorsville
pride
Lake
as he
tailwaters,
observed his grandson's resolve.
kind of on
As
the
a
spur
result
of a moment,
the
I
shared
thought,
struggle,
well, I should get my
a link
phone
was
out
created, one that
and
was
film a
built
little
on
bit of
trust
this and show people
compassion.
what's here.
As Rosemary listened to Max, her eyes softened as they sat around
They
the
did
fire.
almost no
All of a
editing,
sudden, the
basically just cut
egotistical
out the dead
appearance
spots,
disappeared, revealing a
pasted it
young man
together.
who was still trying
The
to
thing
figure
got
out his place in the
1,300
world.
views in 5
When
days.
Max mentioned Grandpa Hank's flaws,
Well, see, I'm a
Grandpa
small
Hank
channel.
admitted
If
that
I
he
get a
had
couple hundred
flaws
views
and said
on a
he was
video,
sorry for ignoring
I think
them
I'm
so
doing
long.
pretty good.
The embers of the fire not only lit up their faces, but they also lit up the hope that had been rekindled in their hearts. It's possible that catching a river monster was a win on the river, but the real
But the
reward
one I
was the
edited and
ties
worked
and
on and
bond
wrote a
that it
script.
established among these people.
I published
This
it a month
family
ago.
began a new
It's
chapter
had-
around the time
it
that
has
the stars began to
247
appear in
views.
the night sky. It
The
was
one
a
from
chapter that
Taylorsville
was
Lake
built
that
on
I
love,
just shot from the hip.
understanding, and the shared melody
It's got
of the
about
crackling
1,400
campfire.
views in
The
about a
week
week or
ended,
two.
but the change had begun. Rosemary and Max reconsidered selling the cabin.
I've
a
got
symbol
quite a
of
few
the life
shorts
they
on my
thought they
channel, but I'm
wanted.
kind of
But
on the
Hank,
fence about
his
them.
eyes filled with love
I
and
can't decide if I
understanding
like them or
assured
not.
him his happiness lay
You
by
get
the
more
river.
subscribers
He simply wished for more
with
visits,
short-form
more
videos.
shared moments. And so the
But the
river
short-form
continued
videos
its
don't
song,
pay very
a
well.
lullaby of peace and hope.
Pretty
the
much,
melody
if
had
you don't get
changed, richer,
10 or
deeper,
20,000
with the harmony
views,
of
you
love
don't make
and forgiveness
anything.
flowing through its current.
A
For
million
Grandpa
views
Hank,
don't pay you
the
very
music
much.
of his life was no longer a solitary tune. It was a symphony of family, forever bound by the river's embrace.
Oh, Doctor Who coffee mug. I'm a big Doctor Who fan. Any kind of sci-fi, I like it. This is a cartoon I have on my channel. You should go and look at it. It's puffer fish. I don't think on the live stream, or on the phone, I don't think you guys can hear the audio.
It's here. I compiled the stories from the fishing videos on my YouTube channel into a Kindle ebook. It's also available on paperback. Sam had been lying awake for what felt like hours when Grandpa had peeked his head
If
into
you're wondering
his
that,
bedroom
what
to
that
wake.
was,
He had been
all
too
the
excited
stories
to
from
sleep.
these fishing
Finally,
videos,
Finally, It was warm
I
enough
put
to
them
go
in a
fishing.
Kindle
He had
ebook
helped Grandpa put the boat
on
in
Amazon.
yesterday after Grandpa had told
You
him
can get
the
it for
channel had been
99
froze
cents.
for a few weeks now.
You can buy the
Sam had nearly
paperback, but it's
vibrated
like
with
$8 or
excitement
$9.
then. It was no surprise he was nearly vibrating now as he pulled a thick pair of wool socks over his toes. The channel may not have frozen in a while, but that didn't mean it was warm enough for shorts and a t-shirt yet. Grandpa poked his head into the bedroom again, a worn tan boonie sitting comfortably on his wrinkled head.
But if you want to
"Are
see
ready,
that
Sam?"
cartoon,
Ready. Sam leapt to his
it's,
feet, proudly wearing the new fishing
it's
vest
on my
he had
channel,
gotten for Christmas that
967
year.
Andy.
It had so many pockets, he
And I
didn't know
think
what
its
he would do with them
title
all.
is
But it was
Beware the
same
Puffer
one Grandpa
Fish.
wore,
It's
so he
like
figured
10 or
he'd find a
15
use for
seconds
them.
long. It's not very
Grandpa
long.
nodded and waved for Sam to follow him. It was still dark outside, the world quiet except for the two of them. Sam loved it. It felt like Grandpa and he were the only two people on Earth. And they
Another
were setting
downside
out on
about
a
being a
voyage of
small channel,
discovery across the
you
sea.
don't get any
Grandpa
love from
shuffled to the
affiliate
small
programs
kitchen to grab
or
the worms
sponsors
from
or
the
any of
fridge
that.
As
I mean,
Sam
I-
shoved his feet into his shoes.
I have
The
almost
rest of the
5,000
house was
subscribers,
silent
but I
except
don't
for
get
Dad's
very many
snores from the
views.
back bedroom. Grandpa had always said Dad sounded like he was chopping wood when he slept, and Dad had always laughed. But
And I'm
Sam
mostly a
didn't
fishing
understand
channel.
what was so funny about it. He figured it was a grown-up thing. Sam impatiently waited at the door as Grandpa meticulously put on his loafers. Grandpa always did things slowly, much too slowly for Sam, but he waited anyway.
I'm gonna push this back on
because
the
even
monitor
this
again
time with
for
him
you
was
guys
special.
on the
Although Sam loved
on the
fishing,
vertical
he
feed.
didn't get a lot of time to visit. Sam played baseball.
Are the
in the
words
spring,
backwards
and his
to
younger
you?
sister,
Are they
Annie,
mirror
showed her
images, or
horse
is that
at the
just
local
because I'm
fair
looking
each
at
year.
it on the
It
phone?
wasn't as if they couldn't find someone to take care of Rusty. It was that his mom didn't want to bother the neighbors too often. Either way, their family was busy with a lot of things that made visiting Grandpa and fishing difficult sometimes. But when they did visit Grandpa, he always made sure the worms were stocked and the boat was full of gas. Finally, Grandpa stood with the styrofoam cup of worms in one hand and the boat keys in the other. "Open the door then, Sam. We don't have all morning." Sam opened the door as quietly as he could.
But when I
was the one
stitched
waiting
all
on
these
you,
fishing
whispered
story videos
Grandpa
together,
hummed as they walked to the garage.
I put a
The
cartoon
fishing
or
poles
something
were
in
leaning
between
on
them.
the wall right inside the doorway, so it was easy for Sam to grab them. Grandpa was halfway through removing the boat cover when he returned with both poles in hand. Sam could hardly wait. In just a few minutes, they'd be cruising slowly down the river, and Sam would have his lure swimming behind them, enticing any sleepy fish nearby. Sam was gently placing the poles in the bow when he heard a familiar
Looks
voice,
like I got
and his heart
2
dropped to his
people
ankle.
on the stream
"Wait,
now.
Sammy. Mom said I can come too."
just went to 0.
Sam could feel the frustration
Hate it when that
bubbling under
happens.
his skin. Annie was walking toward the boat, her long sleep pants and matching sleep shirt vibrant pink, even in the dark. "Mom said this was my time to fish with Grandpa. I heard you leave and asked Mom, so I'm coming too." Annie's jaw was set, clear sign she wasn't going to let Sam or Grandpa leave without her easily. Sam huffed. "You don't even have a fishing pole. You think fish are gross." Annie brushed her wild blonde hair out of her face and plodded to the edge of the channel. "Mom said I can come." Sam groaned. Great. His entire morning was ruined. Annie didn't even like fishing. Every time Sam had caught a fish from the channel, Annie had made a face and refused to touch it. Why did she suddenly want to go with them? He should have been quieter with the front door. He could hear Grandpa quietly chuckle as he helped Annie into the boat. It rocked back and forth as it adjusted to her weight. Sam followed her, purposely landing hard on the deck. As the boat rocked, Annie stumbled and fell to her knees. "Sam," she cried.
I can see
clambering
the
unevenly
stats for
into
how
the
many
seat.
people.
"Be
Looks
nice,
like I have
Sam,"
2
Grandpa
people
warned.
now
Sam flung himself into
watching
the
the
seat
stream. I
farthest
can
away
see
from
them on
Annie
the
and
phone on the
folded his arms
vertical,
with a frown.
but I haven't
The
figured
frown
out
didn't last
on the
long.
desktop.
Once they had reached the
A
edge
minute
of the
ago,
channel
I had a
and
pop-up
entered the river,
window.
cool air on his face and the sound of water sloshing against the sides of the boat
It showed
eased
the-
his tense body,
maybe it's
and he
come-
found
yeah, there it
himself
is.
leaning over to brush his fingers through the murky
Let's
water.
move it over
It was
here.
ice cold, but Sam didn't mind. "Sam, you can fish now," Grandpa said over his shoulder. Sam nearly jumped to the bow of the boat to grab his pole. He carefully unhooked the lure and gave it a firm tug. This lure had
There we go.
replaced
Now
his
got
old
stats
one,
up for
and
both.
he was excited to try it out. "Sammy, is that the lure Dad got you for Christmas?" "Yes," Sam said shortly, walking past Annie to stand at the stern. He checked behind him to ensure he wouldn't hook anything and swung the pole forward sharply, opening the line and sending
Thanks
the
for
lure
watching
far
my
behind
live
him.
stream.
He barely saw it.
If you have any questions or want to know anything, I'll be happy to help you.
Feeling the gentle tug as it fluttered through the water. You didn't put any worms on it. We don't put worms on this type of lure.
Looks like I have one person on the vertical feed. Thanks for stopping in.
Yes,
I have none on the desktop.
Fishing was a quiet sport.
So you guys are the winner.
He didn't have to talk to enjoy it, and he liked to talk all the time. A sudden sharp
what I'm
tug
doing,
on the
and I
line
know you
made
can't
Sam
hear it on the
instinctively yank the pole back
vertical
to set
feed
the
on the
hook.
short
He started
feed,
reeling,
is I'm
excitement
playing a
melting his
video
annoyance.
while
Whatever
I'm
it
live
was,
streaming
it was heavy. Did
on
you
the
catch
main
something?
platform.
What is it? Annie rushed to Sam and leaned over the
But I
side.
couldn't figure
causing
out
the boat
how
to lean with her.
to let you
Sam
guys hear the
struggled to stay
video
standing
without it going over
as
the
he reeled.
speakers and
Finally,
making feedback.
The lure pulled out of the water.
I'm certain
and
there's a way to
Sam
do
sighed.
it. I just don't know
What
how.
is that? Annie said, scrunching
But
up
like
her
I say,
face.
this is my
Just a
first
bunch of
live
seaweed.
stream,
Sam
so I have
the
a
slimy
whole
leaves from
bunch
the
to
lure,
learn.
careful to avoid the hooks. Why did you catch seaweed? I didn't mean to, obviously. Sam flicked the lure back behind them again, setting the line.
Yeah, I'm wearing
You're
headphones,
not supposed to
but
talk
if I
when we're
unplug
fishing,
it,
you'll scare all the
then it
fish away.
reverberates
Annie frowned.
and
Grandpa
sounds
was
horrible.
chuckling again. There were
I'll
a
show
few
you.
blissful minutes of silence as Grandpa guided the boat through the river, and Sam sat waiting for
have to turn
something,
the volume up.
anything. Then, Sammy, can I try? Sam hung his head. Fine. Maybe it would get her to be quiet for longer. Annie came up beside him and he handed her the pole. The lure is already in the water, and I've already set the line, so
One
it
of my
doesn't go out
monitors
too
is the
far
TV.
behind us. If you feel something pull on the line, you have to pull back fast and start reeling with this. He pointed to the hammer.
But you hear like there's an
Then
echo?
he'll pull the lure back to the boat. Annie nodded, concentrating fully on his words.
So I'm pretty
One hand
sure
gripped the pole tightly, the other held the reel. Silence fell over the boat again. Sam glanced at Annie. She was staring at
There's the
spot with
video.
the line at the water, completely transfixed. She hardly moved. Sam blinked. Suddenly, Annie screeched. I felt
So I'm
a
pretty
tug,
sure
and the tip of the pole
that's
rounded over. Set the hook, Sammy
playing it
yelled,
through the
and
speakers
Annie
is
aimed
messing
pole
up
over
the
her head hard. Reel,
audio
reel.
on the live
Annie
stream
furiously
or on
started
the
reeling. Her little
recorded
arms shook as she struggled
desktop
to pull
part.
the pole
So I better
upright.
plug this
Sam
back in.
grabbed above her hand and held the pole firmly. She reeled faster. The tip of the pole dipped towards the surface of the water, nearly bending in half. Sam could
Well,
feel
that's
the pull of the
interesting.
line, and even he struggled to
I'll
hold the
unplug it
pole
again.
upright. There was a violent splashing as the lure.
I don't really
and
care
its
much
cast
about wearing
broke the water
headphones.
surface.
I don't
The
actually
fishing
like
scene
headphones.
shone in the coming light of dawn, and it flipped viciously.
I guess I'll
against the
find
sides
out
of
when
the
this is
boat.
all
Annie
done
squealed.
and I replay it on YouTube. I'll
It's
find
you,
out how
Annie.
bad it
Sam
is.
struggled with the weight of the fish. Grandpa,
I
what
need
is
to
it?
turn this
Grandpa
down.
scooped the fish up in the net and held it up. The weight from the pole eased. Walleye, he said, eyes shining.
There we go.
Well done, Annie.
Because then
Can
you'll
we
never
keep it?
hear me.
Annie asked. Please, please. We can have it for lunch, Sam exclaimed. You can eat the fish you catch.
How does that
Annie
sound?
asked.
Is the
They have to be a
video
certain
volume
size,
too
but yeah.
loud?
So, Grandpa had seized the fish firmly and carefully
I could probably spin you guys around where you can see the video.
onto the plastic measuring board at the top of the live well. He paused as he squinted at the numbers, then he opened the live well and threw the fish inside.
that ain't
Lunch is
working
on
very
Annie
well.
Today. Annie and Sam cheered and high-fived. After that, they took turns using Sam's pole. Sam managed to catch a small perch that they had to throw back, but he didn't mind. He was having fun. When they got back to the house, the sun
Can you
had
read the
risen.
captions
Mom
from
and
there,
Dad
or are
sat
they
on the porch
backwards?
Drinking coffee. Annie raced across the lawn
talking
to tell them
to
about
people
catching
on the
walleye,
vertical
and
feed.
Sam helped Grandpa move the fish from the boat to the cleaning table in the garage. It was a good thing you let Annie come with us, Grandpa said as he began to clean the fish. Otherwise, we'd be starving. Sam shrugged. I guess
This
it
is
wasn't
really
so
quite
bad.
helpful. I'm
You
learning
think she'd
quite a
want
bit.
them tomorrow? Grandpa chuckled. I'm sure she'd love to. Annie raced up to him and grabbed his hand. Sammy, can you show me how to fish in the channel, please? Sam nodded, of course, but it's a little different than in the boat, and Sam began to explain it to her as they walked back to the boat, happy to finally be able to share.
Yeah,
his
I don't
passion
know
with
how
his
to
sister.
make this whole playing the video
A small, peaceful town. A town with a lake in the middle
on the
of it,
vertical
nestled
live
between
stream. I
rolling
don't know how to
hills
make
and
that work.
surrounded by meadows and riverbeds.
It was no surprise that fishing was more than just a hobby there. It was a way of life, a tradition passed down through generations.
I'm sure there's a way to do it. I just haven't quite figured it
The
out.
house he lived in, like most of the other lakeside houses in Enderburn, faced away from the lake, their backs to the water. Every window looked out onto the reeds. Every dream he had was of tadpoles and wading in the water with his friends.
I used AI to do this one. I edited this one with AI. It's kind of a morphing
Days
thing.
out on the lake had meant
I
the
thought it
world
was
to him.
like really
It
cool,
was time he got to spend with his father, a fisherman by
but I
trade.
think I'm the only one
had
on the
3
planet
older
that thought it
siblings,
was cool
cloud
because it
ones,
got like no
and
views.
sometimes it was difficult for a child to share. These days were just for Noah and his father, for the quiet rippling of the water and the humming of dragonflies. From the moment Noah could walk, his father had started taking him on the lake, teaching him the art of fishing. They would cast off from the dock that doubled as their
Brian, I
backboards,
hope I got your name right.
spend
I really
countless hours
appreciate your
together,
feedback and
casting
helping
lines
me,
into the water,
because it's hard to
and
know what's
reveling in
going
the
on
peace
just
that
from
only
this
fishing
end.
could bring.
It's much nicer to have
Those
somebody on the other
Noah
end
would open up the most.
to let me know what's
He
going
found
on.
himself sharing whatever had been bothering him, complaining about a teacher that had been rude to him, a failed
But I'll
test,
tell you,
how sometimes
this live
life
streaming
felt
is
too
much
big and
harder
scary to
than it
exist in.
looks.
His father, Johann, was always happy to listen. It seemed
I guess a
something
guy
about
should
the
like
gentle
write out
rock
a
of the
script
fishing
and
boat
practice it
lulled
all,
Johann
do all
into an
that.
openness he was unaccustomed to. Fishing with his father was Noah's safe place, but it was also where he learned the most about his father. Any childhood story Johann shared was told between the casts of the reel. Once, Noah lost his
Has
fishing
any of
rod
you
to a
visited my
particularly large
channel
fish.
and looked at my
It
fishing
thrashed harder than he
videos?
was used to, and it tore the fishing rod right out of his hands.
Back down
He
to
had
one
been scared his
person
father
on
would
here now.
be disappointed or
We
make him
got
want
3
to buy
likes.
another
I
one.
appreciate that.
But instead, Johann had simply smiled and handed him his own rod. A few days later, he came home from work with a brand new rod and spent the evening before dinner teaching Noah how to hold it so that he wouldn't be taken by surprise like that again. Because freshwater fishing was a passion
I'm
they
not
shared,
talking to the
Johann
desktop
was
very
happy to
much.
impart the wisdom of
I
the
got
craft
it.
to Noah.
I'm using a
He learned about
GoPro.
freshwater fishing gear, the importance of quality reels, and the
You probably can't
nuances
see
of
it, but
different
I'm using a
fishing techniques.
GoPro as a webcam for that.
Johann was always sure to emphasize the basics, the right bait, the perfect cast, and the patience required to coax a catch. The memories of those fishing trips etched themselves into Noah's very being, creating a mosaic of joy,
There we
laughter,
go.
and the quiet companionship
Probably
that
should
only
quit
a
messing
father
with
and
that
son
camera.
could
I'm gonna
share.
make you seasick.
But life has a way of pulling the rug out from under you, and tragedy struck when Johann fell ill. Noah would remember the day his father came home from the doctor's office for the rest of his life. The furrow in his father's brow, and the way he set his prescription down on the dinner table and hid it when Noah tried to look.
Yeah,
Fishing trips dwindled,
I think
grew
you're the
farther
only
and
one
farther
watching,
between
Brylan.
as each one shortened,
Because I can look up
punctuated
here
by
and
coughing
see
fits
that.
and apologies. When
I can
Johann
look up
finally
here and see the
passed,
stats.
Noah simply stopped fishing.
And right now there's
The
one
rods
person
and
and
reels
3 likes.
that once held the promise of shared adventures now gathered dust in the corner of the garage.
Well,
The
I
lake,
can't really expect
once a
people to stick
sanctuary of
around
joy,
when I don't actually
became
know
a
what I'm doing.
reminder of what he was missing. The door to the back porch remained closed. Johann's boat stayed tied to the railing, and Noah let himself fall out of practice. Years passed, and the pain eased, but the longing remained. Noah, now a young man,
Brian,
found
what should
himself
I do
behind
to
the
make
back
this live
door,
stream better?
the hinges screeching from
I'd like,
disuse.
I'd like some
The
feedback.
rusty handle fought him, but soon
How you
he was
think it's
standing
going
on the dock
and
again, looking out.
What I
onto
should
the
do
lake.
different.
The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the water, and he could see a shimmer of a boat out there. A boat with a boy and his father in it, watching the sunset. A realization dawned on him.
Am I
He had
pronouncing
been
your
so
name
eager
right?
to leave behind the things that made him sad. He hadn't realized he was leaving
I
the
haven't had
memory of his
games since the
father behind.
1980s.
Noah dusted off the fishing gear.
Maybe the 90s. I might have had a little bit of game left in the
He had
90s.
abandoned. He unfolded a checklist of freshwater fishing gear, tracing the lines with his fingers.
I'm starting to get to be an old man. I was born in 1961.
The checklist became a
So I
guide,
turned
a roadmap.
I was
back to the
21
passion
years
he had
old in
lost.
1982.
With determination in his heart, Noah delved into the world of freshwater fishing tips and techniques, reacquainting himself with the basics. He read about the best bass lures of 2024, eager to catch up with the innovations that had emerged during his
Back
hiatus.
to 0 viewers.
As he explored catch and release techniques and studied topwater fishing strategies,
Really good practice.
the feeling of connection returned, like a whisper from his father guiding him, his hand holding the fishing rod alongside his own. The journey to regain his fishing prowess led Noah to kayak bass fishing, something he had never done with his father. There had never been the funds for a kayak before, with 3 other siblings to feed.
Oh, you mean like
But they
video
were all grown
games?
up now, moved out. Only him and his mother remained. The solitude of gliding through the water, paddle in hand,
You wouldn't want to
brought a
watch
sense
me
of
live
peace,
stream video
and the
games.
echoes of his father's
I
laughter
suck at
seemed
it.
to ripple across the lake. Johann had been a quiet, stoic man, his laugh a rare treat. Noah could hear it in the quiet splash of the lure and in the lapping of the water beneath him. The lake
But I
healed
never
him
did
faster
play
than
'em a
he
lot.
had expected it to. He hadn't even realized
See,
he
I'm
needed
about
healing.
one
Noah
generation
discovered the
too
trout
early
fishing hacks
to be in love with
and
video
secrets to
games.
successful crappie fishing, applying the newfound knowledge with the enthusiasm of a novice.
Like I
Pike
remember
fishing techniques
when the Commodore
and the thrill of bass
64
fishing
came out,
ground
and it
inspected
was
him.
like amazing
Each new
technology.
challenge echoing the spirit of his father's adventurous soul. In his quest to reconnect with the art, Noah embraced the diversity of fishing. He explored the best soft plastic
Now I
baits
like playing
and
poker.
experimented with
I
carp
really
fishing
don't have.
rigs. The
I just
beginner's
don't care
guide
much
to fly
about video
fishing
games. I played
became
them
a
some.
revelation, opening up a whole new dimension to his angling repertoire. Lake fishing hotspots, once mapped out by his father,
I used to
became
play
Noah's
about 20
playground.
hours a week of
Each
poker.
cast carrying the weight of shared memories. Reviews of fishing rod and reel combos guided Noah in choosing equipment that seamlessly merged tradition with modern innovation. Winter bass fishing tactics and spring bass fishing tips became seasonal companions, marking the passage of time and the evolving patterns of the lake they both loved so dearly. One evening, with the lake bathed in the soft glow of twilight, Noah tried his hand at bank fishing, a nod to the humble beginnings of his fishing adventures. He had a note with him, bank fishing tips for beginners, scrawled in Johann's hurried handwriting. As he cast his line into the water, he felt part of him lighten. Why had he allowed himself to seal this part of his life away? With every challenge conquered and every technique relearned, Noah's journey became a tribute to his father's legacy. He mastered the best fishing knots, an art passed down through generations, and fishing with live bait techniques became a bridge between the past and the present. The seasonal changes in fish
No,
behavior
I never was into
mirrored the
art.
cyclical nature of life, and Noah found solace in the rhythm of the lake. Noah's journey of reconnection wasn't just about the art of fishing. He had realized it long
Just didn't
ago.
seem.
It was about reclaiming a part of himself that he had lost. As he
Just
stood
didn't
by the
seem like
water's
the army
edge,
and me
gazing
got
into
along
the
too
distance,
well. I'm way
he felt
too
a profound
independent.
sense of gratitude for the things Johann had taken the time to teach him. Late one evening, Noah returned home from a
I
day
have a
on the lake
nephew in the Navy.
and found his mother standing on the dock waiting for him.
Two of
She
my
reached out a hand
uncles.
and he took it,
served
clambering up onto the
overseas.
rickety wood beside her.
My father-in-law
As
was
he
in
tied the boat to
Korea.
the
That
railing,
tells
she
you about
smiled
how
at
old
him.
me and him's getting.
I'm glad he found his
He's
way back to
81.
you.
He was in Korea.
Noah smiled back. Me too. Fishing reunion. Jake and I grew up together, and when high school was over, we
I
attended
think
the
my
same
uncles
college. The cold
got out of the
winters
army
were a
right
drastic
before the
change from our
Vietnam
sunny
War.
climate down in Florida, but the college experience was a roller coaster of its own.
Vietnam
While in
War
school,
ended shortly
we had many
after I
hobbies,
graduated high school.
but none of them consisted of much outdoor time since the climate was not to our liking. When we graduated college, we went our separate ways. I moved back to Florida, and he went to Alabama to marry the woman of his dreams. I eventually met the
I got
woman
3
I would
people
marry,
now.
and
Thanks for
aside from
joining.
the weddings, Jake and I didn't see much of
This
each
is my
other.
first live stream.
Adulthood had
Just
taken
getting here.
control.
I'm playing
Tried
a
to plan
video
trips
on my
back and
computer.
forth, but they never seemed to work out.
Playing one of my videos
Jake would
on
send
the
me
computer
videos
to
of
kind
him and his
take
wife
up the
hiking
dead
and
spot
exploring, and I would send videos of all the
Fill in
bass
the
I caught
space.
on the lake behind my house. It was a beautiful lake that twisted between the mangroves and under
This
the
is a
bridges of nearby
compilation of
streams.
fishing
Plenty of
storage
fish to be
videos
caught,
that I have
so
on
I was
my
always
channel.
telling Jake he needed to come get
And
hooked
it's
up.
like
It was
2.5
late
hours
August
long,
when he
but
and his
most
wife
of
finally
the
visited our little town
independent
just north
videos
of
are just
Daytona
like 8
Beach.
minutes long.
We had the guest room set up for them, and they settled in easily. Although our wives had only met a few times, they bonded quickly. Most likely because Jake and I were so similar, they knew what to expect. The first night we took it easy, started a fire, and relaxed. The next day, Jake and I would hit the lake, and I'd show him the monster bass I'd been catching. We woke up early, earlier than necessary to be honest. We were more excited than a kid on Christmas Eve. We made some coffee, then headed out behind the house.
I'm gonna be right
Our
back.
wives were still
I'm gonna leave the
asleep,
video
and the sun was
playing.
hardly peeking over the horizon. We loaded our gear into my 14-foot John boat. I hooked the battery up to the trolling motor, and we slid it down the bank into the water, ready to launch. I held the boat steady while Jake carefully climbed in. He wobbled quite a bit, but I had a firm grip on the sides. Regardless, he lost his footing and his left shoe sank into the water as he tried to catch his balance. I couldn't help but laugh as he cursed and regained his composure. He crawled into the boat, and I climbed in after, powered up the motor, and we made our way onto the lake. As we coasted along the bank, behind my neighbors' houses, Jake took off his shoes and left them to dry, while I rummaged through my backpack trying to find my favorite lures. I held a few bags up in front of me and showed Jake our options. He chose a bright orange lure, and I opted for dark purple. We got to the middle of the lake where I stopped the motor and let us drift. Jake admired the beauty while I rigged our fishing poles. When I finished, I handed him his pole and directed the boat a little closer to the shoreline. They like to sit up there next to the bank, I said to him, in the mangroves. That's why this lake is so good. Mangroves rarely grow in fresh water, but provide amazing cover. Be careful. The mangroves will eat your lure before the fish do. Jake laughed and cast towards the shore, obviously intimidated by the branches hanging over the water. It was a weak cast, but it had been a while, so I didn't make fun of him. Instead, I cast my own line, reminding him how it's done. My topwater lure landed between the mangrove roots, and I let it settle for a
I'm
second
back.
before
That's the
tugging the
problem
line
with
little
getting
by
old.
little,
You have to go to
making
the potty all
ripples
the
to
time.
attract attention. Jake noticed my method and mimicked my actions. We trolled along the bank for a while, casting and reeling in, covering a lot of water. The sun was finally starting to make an appearance, and so were the ducks. They swam between us and the shore, and we tangled our lines while trying to prevent injury to the ducks. We spent a solid 10 minutes untangling our lines, then decided to move away from the ducks. After quite a few more casts, Jake became overconfident. He overcast and his lure hooked into a low-hanging tree, wrapping around twice before it settled itself in between two of the branches. He mumbled something under his breath and I chuckled. Reeling in my line and directing the boat to the tree, I stood beneath it and untied his tangled
See, I don't
line,
have any
dropping
bobbing
it back in the boat before taking off to find a less dense area along the shoreline.
So I don't know
Since
if
the
this
lake was
was
surrounded by
on this
mangroves,
microphone or not.
It was difficult to find a spot with no trees, but I found one that had minimal coverage and we started to cast again. This time, it was me who got hooked, and it was quite the recovery mission. After fighting with the line around the branches, I gave up cutting my
I
line,
guess when
and
I
saying
get
farewell
done,
to one of
I'll
my
play
favorite
it and
lures.
see.
I had definitely scared all the fish off by then, so again, we relocated. I set up a drift, letting the breeze take us along a favorable stretch of bank while I rigged my fishing pole back up for more. When I looked up, I noticed we were 15 feet from a gator sunning himself on the bank. He wasn't huge, but big enough to keep an eye on. As we drifted a little past him, we began casting again. Finally, Jake hooked something and began reeling excitedly. The gator was startled and slid into the water to hide while Jake hollered, ready to see what was on the end of his line. Just as he was pulling it up to the boat, the gator made another appearance, snatching the fish right off Jake's line. We both leaned back, almost tipping the boat, but careful to catch ourselves and not end up in the water with the beast as Jake's line continued to spool out. I grabbed my knife and cut the line before we ended up skiing across the lake. After that, we took a minute to regroup. That had never happened to me before, and I felt bad that it had just happened to Jake. This was supposed to be a relaxing and enjoyable fishing trip, not a gator hunting expedition. We left the gator to enjoy his free meal and made our way to a different section of the lake to start fresh.
I put the
I had
headphones
sent
back
Jake
on
so many
to
videos
see.
of lunker bass,
That way
and
I
now I
can
couldn't
tell
catch
when I
anything but
replay it
trees,
if that
and him a
causes
gator.
an echo or not.
This
in
trip was not going as planned. Once we got going again, we noticed a
thanks for
school of
joining
bait
us
fish
on the
nearby, and
vertical
recovered a
feed.
little of our hope for catching something good. The weather turned
Yeah, I
and
think they're
threatened to
gone
rain
again.
on our parade. The clouds rolled in so fast, you'd have thought the sun had set. Then the rain came and drenched
Hello.
us without mercy. At first we were both angry, but had to just laugh it off. Nothing had gone as planned so far.
This is
Why
my first
did we
live
think
stream,
the weather
so
would cooperate?
sorry if it's
Regardless,
kind of rough.
we decided to make the haul
What
back
I'm
towards
doing
the house,
is I'm playing a
trolling
video
slowly enough to still fish on the way
on
back.
my laptop,
I got a
on
couple
the
of bites,
desktop.
but nothing stuck,
but I don't know
Same
if
with
it
Jake.
causes the
and I could tell he was
audio
bummed out.
to echo
I was too,
on the other
more
stream.
so for him. Then he jerked his rod back and hollered again, hooking something heavy. He reeled it in and landed a giant largemouth bass. It flopped around as he tried to grip it, then fumbled with his other hand to get his phone out of his pocket. He tossed me the phone yelling, "Take a picture!" His wet phone screen made it difficult, but I managed to
I'll
snap
tell you,
a couple
this
of
live
blurry
streaming
photos
is
through the
much harder
raindrops
than
on
it
his
looks
lens.
on TV.
To this
I
day,
watch the live
that
streamers
photo
on YouTube.
is in a
it looks
frame
easy, but
sitting on his mantle at home, and
it's
every
hard to
time
be
I visit,
interesting.
we can't help but laugh about what a disaster that day had been.
Only Electrolux has Smart Boost technology for the most effective stain removal and longer lasting fabrics. Now available in the new laundry tower.
Whether you're planning a vacation getaway or a weekend escape,
I do have coffee
go
though.
wherever
Apparently
the
you're
road
supposed
may
to have
lead
coffee
in
on a
any
live
car
stream.
you choose. Take advantage of
Doctor
all
Who
your
coffee
car
mug.
rental benefits as a AAA member.
No, George, you can't go fishing. You need to do your chores, George's mother told him. He had wanted to go fishing the whole day, but his chores had piled up. He decided to just leave since he was in a bad mood. He slammed the door shut and left, holding his fishing rod and reel in his hand. He walked to the lake. It was quiet and he fished. The water was still and he had no bites for hours. He felt incredibly frustrated and slammed his rod to the ground, leaving the area. A couple of men saw him do this and
Nobody's
stopped him
watching
before
on
he
the
left the
desktop
lake.
anyways.
Hey, aren't you Andrew's kid? One of them
If it
spoke up.
reverberates,
He was an old grizzled man that held a fishing rod and a cup of coffee in the other hand. Yeah, why? George grumbled, continuing to leave. You won't catch with that rod and reel.
How's the
Take
sound?
this one. The man
the
shouted behind him, throwing him
video
a
too
shiny
loud
brand
and you
new
can't
rod.
hear me,
The
or is
rod
it
was
about right?
sturdy and completely brand new. Why would you give me this? George asked, startled at the sudden gift. Consider it a gift for being Arthur's grandson, the old man replied. George was surprised and walked home, his new rod in hand and a confident swagger. He opened the door, and his mother immediately shouted at him, berating him for his lack of responsibility. George didn't care, and he finished his chores. He went up to his room, examining every part of the new rod. He was astonished and looked at his wall, where a collage of fishing magazines were hung up. It was all fishing competitions that had been won by his grandfather, Arthur. I wish I could be like him, George whispered to himself. His late grandfather smiled in all of the pictures. The man he met at the lake had revered his grandfather so much as to give George a free rod and reel. He kept looking at the rod and thought to himself, pondering long and hard, why wasn't he a good fisherman? Why didn't he have any talent? Then his dad walked in. Your mother told me what you did today. Wait a minute. Is that a new rod? Yeah. Why do you care? George snapped back. Son, I'm not mad at you. Just tell me where you got that, Andrew spoke, his tone calm. He stepped towards George, taking the rod and reel, inspecting it. This is real nice, son, Andrew said, handing the rod back. He looked at the wall and the magazines lining it. Why don't you try to win one of those, Andrews asked, pointing at the collage. I'm no good at fishing, George said, standing up to put the rod away. No, you can do it. Just believe in yourself, Andrew sighed. That'll only get me so far. I have no talent at all, George grumbled. Why don't we go together, Andrew asked. George was startled. His dad had never been fishing since his grandfather passed. But, George stuttered, no, son, we're going fishing. Get your stuff ready and we'll head out tomorrow, Andrew ordered. George readied his things and couldn't sleep because of the excitement for the next day. They woke up early, drank their coffee, ate breakfast, and headed out. The day was calling them, and they went straight to the lake to register for the competition. Hey there, Andrew, a man called out to them. He was in full fishing gear and looked like a stereotypical fisherman. His equipment was in the back of his pickup truck and was full of lures, different reels, a few rods, as well as a few extra things George knew nothing about. Hi, Jeremy. How you been? Andrew replied, motioning to George to go register for them. As they talked, George went to the booth to register. He was told to rent a small boat and pay the fees. Everything was ready, and he walked back to his dad with their documents. Dad, let's go, George said, handing over the papers. The competition was starting soon, and the rules were being read out by the judges. They all stood near the dock and listened. The rules are as follows. Each team will consist of 2 anglers. You're allowed to fish from the shore or the lake. The winner will have to bring the heaviest walleye. All fish must be caught without any foul play. May the best fisherman win, and everybody be back by 5 p.m. sharp, the judge announced. They each hurriedly grabbed their equipment, some going to the outskirts of the lake to fish from the shore, and others jumping into their boats. George and Andrew took it slow and planned as they went. Son, we're going to win this, all right? Just follow my lead, Andrew said, climbing into the boat. They started it and set out, gently cruising on the serene blue waters. They passed by fishermen who had already begun catching fish, huge walleye, and George looked nervous. Relax, kid. It's only the start, Andrew said, noticing George's concern. They finally reached the back of the lake where there was a shady area to fish. This is perfect, Andrew said. Pull out your fishing rod, he added. The 2 began fishing, but to no avail. Nothing was biting, and the water was still. After a few hours of this, George slammed his rod to the floor. It bounced up and slapped George in the face. That's what you get for being impatient, Andrew joked. George wasn't having it and sat back down. Fish won't always bite, kid. You need to be patient, and it'll pay off, Andrew advised. He watched his rod and sipped a cold drink. The rod moved, and immediately he grabbed it, waiting for the fish to bite. He then set the hook perfectly. A few moments later, the fish lay in the boat, and George was shocked. He looked at it and smiled, grabbing his rod. He started fishing again, and the fish came in one after another. Their luck had changed for the better, but would it be enough to win the competition? They would just have to find out. They kept fishing well after lunch, and the time was nearly over. So they headed back to grab a quick bite to eat and check out the other catches. They pulled up to the shore, docking the boat, and took their fish to the weighing table. Their cooler was marked, and they were allowed to sit back. They watched as other fishermen walked through, and George spotted a huge fish. He pointed towards it, and Andrew's jaw dropped. It had to have been the largest walleye he had ever seen. It had to have been over 10 pounds, and the fish they had caught couldn't compare. Andrew sighed. "Looks like we got beaten," he said softly. "Let's go back. We have to win for Grandpa," George replied, frustrated. "No, let's just wait. There's only 20 minutes left either way," Andrew said. But George had already left. He ran and disappeared into the greenery, his rod in hand. "That kid will be the death of me," Andrew grumbled. "Ha! The kid's got fire," a voice came from behind. It was an old friend. "I met him yesterday, gave him that rod and reel, and I see he's putting it to good use," the man laughed. "Long time no see, Sam," George replied. "I had a feeling it was you who gave it to him," George laughed. "Time flies, man. Kid's all grown up. Let me see if he can turn the tides and catch a decent one," Sam sighed. They both continued talking, and most of the fishermen walked through, each carrying a cooler, and they all marked theirs, placing them on the long table. The weigh-ins were starting, and the judges began. There were still 10 minutes until the time was over, and they began weighing each fish. After everything was weighed, the largest was a 14-pounder, and everyone was shocked. The runners-up were off by a pound and were disgruntled, but congratulated the lucky fisherman. There was 1 minute left, and Andrew grew worried. He began pacing backwards and forwards, waiting on George. Then he heard a yell. George was running like his life depended on it. He beelined towards them in a huff. He held up the fish he had caught, and it was huge and looked nearly identical to the winner. He laid it on the table and looked proud. "Wow, George, I didn't know you had it in you. Let's see how much it comes out to," Andrew said, smiling. "The time is over. Weigh-ins are done," the judge said, handing the fish back to George, who looked upset. He turned his back and walked away. "Hey!" a shout came from the crowd. "Let the kid weigh his fish. It was only a minute late," the crowd shouted. The judge looked at the winner, who laughed heartily.
So if you're just
"Let the
joining
kid
me,
weigh
this
his
is my
fish.
very first
If
live
he
stream,
wins, he deserves it," the
and I
man
have
said.
no idea
The
if
fish
it's
was
any
weighed,
good or not, so I
and it came
appreciate
out
your
to
feedback.
14.1
Put it on
pounds,
chat.
1/10 of a pound
Like, is
heavier
the
than
lighting
the
okay?
previous
Can
best.
you hear it okay?
The crowd cheered. George had won his first competition. Andrew smiled. "That's my son," he shouted, pumping the air. George was given a huge trophy along with a decent cash prize. He went home happy as can be and hung up his own picture next to his grandfather's. He had finally won something, and from then on, he went on to win competition after competition and cemented himself as the boy who fished. From the shoreline, somewhere in the distance, he heard a blood-curdling scream, like a woman screaming at the top of her lungs.
I can't help but feel good. I can't help but feel fine.
Jackson had always been a carefree spirit. He did things on his terms, and in most situations, things worked out in his favor. Still a young man of 25, he was not accustomed to heeding warnings and taking advice. He was in pretty good standing with himself, so he valued his own opinions and interpretations of things more favorably than anyone else. But if there was one thing he enjoyed more than doing things his way, it was fishing. Since Jackson graduated college, he didn't get to see his old man too much, but he fondly remembered fishing together, recalling those as some of his best childhood memories. These days, though, his dad was a bit too old for a full day and night of fishing, and none of Jackson's friends were particularly fond of the activity either. That wasn't going to stop him, however. He had his mind set on a fishing trip, and he was going to take it. But, in typical Jackson fashion, he was not going to do any regular fishing trip. He was going to hit a body of water that he had never been to before, and possibly few others have. The topic festered in his mind and became a bit of an obsession. He spent long hours into the night scouring the internet for out-of-the-way, hidden, largely obscure locations, but he finally stumbled upon a small body of water about 4 hours' drive from his apartment. The location was named the Invisible Lake, and he loved the name.
trying to dig into the origin of its namesake, but all he could find was that the small lake was located in a valley surrounded by tall, rocky mountains. Jackson adored the cleverness of the name. That was enough to sell him on the lake, and he shut his laptop, satisfied with his choice. But the rash decision left him ignorant of the disclaimers and the warnings that followed. 2 weeks later, Jackson was packed up, ready to go, canoe firmly strapped down in his pickup bed, and headed out early on a Saturday, stopping for breakfast at a local joint, eating his fill, and then at the bait store to pick up some last-minute tackle. Satisfied he had everything he needed, he climbed into his truck and headed down the highway towards his destination. His excitement made his trip seem eternal, as he was anxious to get there and start fishing. He was headed out alone, and he wanted it that way. Anyone going with him would be impatient and would probably want to leave when it got dark, probably worried about bugs, noises, and utter darkness. Jackson didn't want to put up with any of that. This was his trip, and much like everything else in his life, he was going to do it his way. After stopping by a store and picking up snacks, food, and supplies a few miles from the mountain roads, Jackson stuffed his cooler, placing it in the passenger seat. It was time to head to the lake. The roads were windy and had certain turns a bit too sharp for being up on hills. Jackson took it easy, letting his adventurous spirit and bravado drive him onward. He entered a seriously questionable tunnel through one of the mountains and came out on the other side a couple minutes later to a lack of paved roads. The path was graveled for about a mile, but then just became a beaten track. He was surprised to see people walking around. They struck him as not the sort of folks one would find in the city or the suburbs. They were not only rural, but mountain-weathered. They looked upon him curiously as he pulled up. Looking around, he began to look for the lake. His GPS was hardly operational in the mountains, and he had no clue where to go from there. Then again, the lake was invisible, he thought, so it certainly lives up to its name. Without any signs around, he was going to have to waste his time wandering around and wanted to get to his fishing expedition. He rolled down the window, flanking an elderly man with a wrinkled face, protruding cheekbones, and deep-set brown-black eyes. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm looking for the lake. The invisible..."
Playing one of my videos.
Jackson considered how foolish he sounded when completing that sentence, asking for directions to an invisible lake. But he went with it. "Lake, I'm going to do some fishing." The old man stayed silent for a long moment, his eyes shifting to look at Jackson's pickup bed, noting the canoe and buckets. Finally, he turned back to Jackson and said in a grave voice, "Young man, I think you're confused. There is no lake here." He didn't strike Jackson as insincere, but he thought maybe the locals called it something else. He had an odd accent that Jackson couldn't place. "I think you misunderstand. I'm looking for the lake in this valley. Going to do some fishing today." He casually threw his thumb backward over his shoulder and smiled. "Just trying to get down there to set up. It's on the map, but there isn't much of a road here, so I just want the quickest, safest way down." Jackson waited a moment, seeing if the man would speak. When he didn't, Jackson continued, "Look, if you can't help me, that's fine. I'll ask someone else." He gave the man another moment and then nodded and started rolling up his window, figuring he could take his chances with a less weird local later. Just as the window was almost rolled up, the man spoke, causing Jackson to roll it back down. "It's not a lake, it's a pond, and it's not a good place. You are a young man. Be wise. Find another place." Jackson sighed. "All right, look, we're both adults here. I don't need the scare tactics. I just want to go fish and..." "No fish," the man interrupted. Jackson was getting fed up, but the man spoke again. "No fish," he said calmly. "There are none in the pond. It's a dead pond. Nothing..." And he hesitated, as if he was trying to use his words carefully.
Easy.
Oh.
"Lives there. You are wasting time and day." Jackson sat back and rolled his eyes. "Listen, man, there are not dead ponds or lakes. There is marine life everywhere that's not a puddle. So I appreciate the local lore, or whatever this is you are getting at, but I am not your responsibility. Just show me the lake or pond, and I'll be gone." The man's black eyes narrowed. "That you'll be. That you'll certainly be. Shame." pointed down the hill. Head down a ways and park where the trees get too thick. You'll have to walk from there. You'll know it when you get there, but Jackson didn't wait, and he started rolling up his window. Leave before it gets dark. The stranger's voice was muted by Jackson's shut window and cranked up radio. He gave the stranger a thumbs up and moved forward down the hill. He finally got to a place where the trees were thicker and the beaten path abruptly ended. He looked forward to seeing the lake in front of him. It certainly did look more like a mid-sized pond, and it was obscured by hilly mounds from nearly every side. Jackson got his things together, untied his canoe, and dragged it down. About 20 minutes later, he had everything set, so he pushed the rocking canoe into the water and climbed in, paddling out towards the center. Finally, he was here. Arriving at the center, he set up his fishing gear and cast his line. The sun was way overhead, and his watch told him it was just after 2. The weather was unbelievably pleasant. He thought back fondly on his days with his dad fishing at the lake,
Every
making
time
jokes,
I notice somebody
sometimes
showing up,
inappropriate
I
ones,
say hello.
that had his
hello
mother
out
known,
there.
she would have lost her mind on
already
both
gone.
of them, but they had their guy code down pat. Jackson put his headphones in his ears and turned up a playlist of his favorite tunes. This was the life. He could spend every day like this if it wasn't for the pesky need for money from his job. He looked around as he waited for a bite, but saw only the peaceful serenity of the lake and the woods. The music drowned out the sounds of nature, and before he knew it, his rumbling stomach told him it was dinner time. He gladly scuffed down a sandwich,
looks
some
like I
pickles,
got
and a
two
ginger
people now.
ale, sending
I'm
his
playing a
cooler
video in
behind
the
him.
background
He
while
hadn't
I'm
got
doing
a
my
bite,
live stream.
so he
just to
positioned the
kinda
fishing rod under his arm
take up
securely
space
and laid his
so I
head
don't
back
have
on the
any dead
cooler.
air.
The sun was on its way down behind the trees, giving
This
the
is
lake
my
a
first
serene
live
glare
stream. Oh,
and
they're
putting
gone
on
again.
an impressive light and shadow show on the trees. With his music in his ears and the peaceful pond around him, Jackson felt relaxed, and before he knew it, he drifted off to sleep. When he awoke, the music in his ears was still playing, but he had no idea how long he had dozed. He felt the rod under his arm and opened his eyes to take a look around. When he opened them, he first questioned if they were still closed, as all he could see was absolute darkness. He rubbed his eyes, trying to adjust, and blinked away the sleep. It was pitch black as he sat up, rocking the canoe from side to side. He looked around, feeling moisture everywhere, on his face, arms, and legs. He yanked the headphones from his ears. How long had he been asleep? The beats fell away, and Jackson was greeted by a hum of crickets, tree frogs, and night birds. Somewhere off in the distance, he could faintly make out the subtle glare of a crescent moon. This was not ideal. He couldn't see in any direction, so he had no idea where his canoe had floated while he was asleep. Even if he were to start paddling, he would surely end up on the shore, but he had no idea if he would land on the right side, and how would he get to his truck with the canoe? He considered leaving the canoe as long as he could get into the truck, lock the doors, and spend the night in the comfortable seats. He began to question how adventurous his spirit was. It then occurred to him that he had a flashlight in his bag. He felt around for it and found it under one of the canoe seats. He unzipped it and dug into the bag, finally getting his flashlight.
I don't know.
He turned
this
it
is-
on
I'm
and
looking
pointed
at
it
this
outward.
on
If Jackson was hoping to see the shoreline,
It says ads
he was
on the
entirely
meter.
out
I
of
don't
luck.
know what that is.
The light reflected in his face immediately, and he had to point it away from his line of sight. He was surrounded by mist. That was the wetness he felt all over. The mist was everywhere. He couldn't see the surface of the
Don't know
water,
what the
and he
ads
could
on the
barely
meter
make out
is.
his legs in the canoe. The thought of the lake being called invisible suddenly made more sense. He wasn't sure what to do. While he was considering his options, he suddenly felt movement by his leg. His fishing rod was starting to rock backwards and forwards just slightly. Moving his flashlight to the opposite hand, he grasped the rod firmly. There was no tug, but he could feel the canoe moving slightly through the dark, and surrounded by mist, he had no idea about the direction. He focused on his hearing, trying to use his other senses, but all he heard was the noise of nature and the splashing of the water against the side of the canoe. The rod moved a bit more, so he set the flashlight down and grabbed it with both hands. He tried tugging on it slightly, feeling a level of resistance. No fish? Hey, old timer, he said out loud to himself, thinking immediately how strange his voice sounded in the darkness. He pulled up on the line more, and the resistance increased. He began to reel slowly to pull whatever was on the other end up. Blind fishing was certainly a brand new experience.
Slowly
The
but
line
surely,
suddenly
I'm getting
jammed,
this
causing
live
Jackson to
streaming
pull extra hard,
software
tipping back
figured
and
out,
rocking
I
the
think.
canoe unnervingly. What's going on here? He debated on whether or not he should just set the rod down, hold it in place, and wait till he could see once the mist cleared. But there was no guarantee of that happening anytime soon. Looking around, he decided to give the line
I'm trying
another
to
pull.
stream two
As he began to
locations.
pull,
I've got the phone
it gave
set up
and
over
started
here,
moving toward
streaming
him. Whatever
on
was
the
on
short
the end
stream,
was close now.
but
He
the
couldn't
main
tell how much was
stream
left,
is here
but the
on the
weight was
desktop.
sizable, and he thought it was close to the surface. Just when something broke the surface of the water, which Jackson could hear but not see, from the shoreline, somewhere
I'm
in the
curious
distance,
about is
he heard
'cause I
a
have my-
blood-curdling scream,
I have
like a
my
woman
open mic
screaming
over
at the
here
top
to
of
the
her
side.
lungs. His heart jumped,
I'm wondering
and he
if it's
almost let go of the
echoing
rod,
on the desktop.
whipping his head around, hopelessly
you're
seeing
watching
just the
on a
mist
computer
in the minimal light
or
from the flashlight. Suddenly,
in
the
landscape,
screaming sound was answered again
I'd
by
like to know
another
what the sound
somewhere
is like
else
if the
off in
sound
the
is
distance,
echoing.
and then a third, seemingly from behind him. This one was much closer than the others. Jackson tried to steady the canoe that rocked from his head, whipping backwards and forth. The screams continued. He had to believe it was fish or cats or some other nocturnal animal like a fox. The line became heavier again. He figured he might as well get a catch out of this deal, and he would have a story to tell. He yanked hard as the surface of the lake broke again, and whatever on the end swung towards him, splashing him all over and covering his face with a wet, slimy, oozy substance. Freaked out, Jackson let go of the rod, dropping it into the canoe and whatever was on the end of it alongside it. He scrambled for the paddle, and as soon as he found it, he began to paddle backward. No matter where in this
I
lake
love
he
me
was,
some Yeti.
it was better to be on shore.
Not a
This place
sponsor.
was strange, and the surroundings helped nothing. It wasn't long before the canoe hit the shallows. Jackson grabbed the flashlight, desperately
Actually
looking
got
behind
that
him to see if he could
through my
identify
wife's
the
work.
shoreline. Luckily, he was
Her work
close,
took a spell
so he
where they
pushed
was
off with
giving
his
us
oar
Yetis
a
every
bit
Christmas.
more and
We
stopped
didn't get
short
one
when
this
his
year,
entire
but
canoe
we got
was
some
on the
kind of
shallow
Yeti,
part of the
something
pond.
like
He
3
stepped
Christmases
out
in a
and
row.
pulled it up on the shore. The screaming sounds from around
Which
the
was
lake
pretty
began
sweet.
again. 2 of them seemed like they were only a dozen feet away.
'Cause I was way
He pulled
too
the
tight to
canoe
ever
up,
pay what they
smacking
want
his
for a
head on
Yeti.
branches along the way. The mist was slightly less dense here. Jackson swung the flashlight around
I don't
him
like to
and
pay
up the
that much
hill,
for a
hoping
glass
he was
'cause it
near his
sure is
truck.
shooting.
He didn't see it at first,
I'll take
so
off
he
and leave
looked
it
back
somewhere.
into the canoe and stepped back as he
So
saw
when
a
I
dark
get
shape
something
in
nice
it.
like that,
The
I
shape
never
didn't
take it
move,
anywhere.
so he peeked closer, noting that it was a large water
Talking
plant.
about my Yeti
Feeling like a
that I got
coward,
from my
he
wife's
looked
work.
around with the flashlight again, looking up the
It's
hill.
pretty awesome,
About 30
especially for
feet
free.
up, he saw what looked like the front of his truck. He wasn't going to waste any time. Yanking on the canoe to make sure it was fully out of the water, Jackson cautiously but quickly began to scramble up the hill, but he had to turn back because his keys were still in his bag. He grabbed the entire bag and climbed up the hill. The screams didn't stop, and the tree frogs were unbearably loud. He dug for his keys, trying to get them out while keeping the flashlight in front of him. As he made it up the slope, the mist cleared slightly and he could see his truck. He clicked the key button to unlock it, and the headlights flashed brightly, illuminating the misty night. He was close now, and he scrambled to the truck as quickly as he could. When he got there, he threw open the passenger door and got in, realizing something caught his foot.
At Kroger Pharmacy, our vaccine experts provide COVID, shingles, pneumonia, HPV, and more vaccines.
Check out the newest strength equipment at Planet Fitness. Join the club today. Save $28 or more when you join for just...
Panicking, he ripped at it, and it came loose, letting him in the truck as he turned and slammed the door and the lock shut behind him. At least here, he felt in relative peace. He huddled up in the seats and looked around until exhaustion overtook him. Surprising as it was, since he had just woken up a while ago, he fell asleep. When he woke up in the morning, the sun was shining into his truck, and he squinted as he moved out of the way. He glanced around, seeing nothing but the serene scene from the previous day. As he made his way out of the truck, he realized that a route by the truck had a small piece of his pants on it. That explains his foot from last night. He got down the hill, threw the giant water plant out of his canoe, and dragged it up the hill, tying it to his truck bed. After struggling to turn his truck around, he finally headed back up the hill. When he neared what began to resemble a road, he saw a couple people sitting on a log. One of them was the old man he saw the other night. As he drove by, the man smiled slyly and raised his hand in an almost mocking gesture. Jackson ignored it and drove home, vowing to make this weird lake a truly invisible one to him from now on.
The fishing tournament was starting. The prize was 10 grand. Paul and Dwayne were excited. Last year they weren't prepared, but this year they were ready. They had spent all year planning on their sure victory. "Paul, we gotta get this, or it'll all be to waste," Dwayne said. Paul didn't reply and was staring into the distance with fire in his eyes. Dwayne turned to see their rivals, Brad and Billy Smith. The twins were hated by everyone. They had won 7 tournaments in a row just this year, and even though the judges paid close attention to them, they had no evidence of any cheating or foul play. Paul and Dwayne both knew this was baloney. "Those twins are cheaters," Paul cursed. Dwayne turned to him, holding his shoulders. "We'll get them, don't worry." The judges beckoned everyone to the dock where they would set off on the lake. There were 20 teams all ready to win. The head judge announced, "All anglers, please go to the cabin to register before boarding your boats. All anglers will set out at exactly 7:30 a.m. and be back here at 5 p.m. This gives you ample time to fish. The species is bass, and the total weight at the end of 2 days will decide the winner. A dead fish is not eligible for weigh-in." The participants all nodded and went to register. They now stood on their boats. The signal went and all the anglers moved out. Dwayne and Paul had both grown up on this lake and slowly cruised along, avoiding the other boats. The Smith twins zoomed past them in their luxury boat, bought with their winnings from other competitions. Paul swore under his breath. Paul and Dwayne were now at their favorite spot, a shady area under the towering trees. They chose their favorite lures and began casting. The twins could be heard cheering in the distance. Their obnoxious behavior angered the two friends, but they used this to fuel their resolve. Dwayne had a catch and he pulled up, setting the hook perfectly, and in under a minute he had the fish in the boat. A huge bass. They waited and put it in the live well, a good catch to start the day. The next bite came, and the next, and slowly but surely they caught a few decent fish over the next hour. When they inadvertently foul-hooked a trophy bass, they noticed there was something very strange. Dwayne pulled the fish to the top of the water, only to discover it was on a stringer. There were 4 more trophy bass on the same stringer, which was held in place by a rope and a small anchor. "What the world?" Paul muttered. Both men were shocked. Someone was cheating by staging fish under the water. "Should we tell the judges?" Paul asked. Dwayne paused and said, "I have a better idea," his mind scheming up a plan to out the Smith brothers and stop their cheating once and for all. Paul released the fish, and the two set off slowly to avoid making noise. They crept up on the twins' boat and began fishing just out of view. However, they could still see the twins through the branches of a tree. They were completely hidden, and Paul began to record the twins. Eventually, the twins pulled up a pen containing 5 trophy bass. They cheered and started putting them away. Dwayne was catching fish at the time, and Paul shared the video. Both grinned at each other from ear to ear. They had clear, solid proof of the twins cheating. Now, all they needed was to get this to the judge. The pair kept on fishing and casually passed the twins, who jeered at them as they cruised along. The two simply kept a straight face and returned to the dock. They got off their boat and immediately headed to the judge's table. The other judges were away watching the different participants to make sure there wasn't any cheating. The head judge sat at the table, and when the duo walked towards him, he greeted them with a warm smile. Paul handed him the phone where the video played, and the judge was shocked.
For memories that last and produce that lasts longer too, only Frigidaire's Crisp Seal Fresh Crispers have an antioxidant filter to help you waste less food. Frigidaire.
Hey! Hey, Mom! How was it It was amazing!
Tween milestones like this may start at age 9.
It's really hard! It smells like you did.
HPV vaccination.
He held the phone for a few seconds and handed it back. He now turned to the two men smiling, and he said slyly, "What was it you wanted to show me?" "All I see are pictures of your beautiful catches." Paul and Dwayne were shocked, and Paul went back to the video, but it was gone. "What the world?" Paul muttered. Dwayne looked over and he saw the video was gone and realized the judge was corrupt. Of course the twins were relaxed. They had someone covering their back. Paul and Dwayne were infuriated and stared daggers into the judge, who kept the act up smiling. The judge said coldly, "If you have nothing to show me, then hurry up. You don't want to be beaten, do you?" Dwayne and Paul walked away, each step they took heavy with distaste. "I have a copy," Dwayne whispered to Paul. "The one you sent me is still on my phone, so we have to plan how we should do this properly." Paul and Dwayne heard the judge on the phone, presumably telling the twins what had happened. They returned to their boat and left. There was only 1 hour remaining, and some of the others had already returned. Dwayne racked his brain for ideas and realized the simplest one. We can't guarantee that all the judges aren't corrupt, so we can't risk showing them the evidence we have. "We should just call the police," Dwayne said. Paul looked puzzled. "The police won't come out for a fishing tournament." Dwayne replied, "That's the neat part. We both know the twins have anger problems. We should just wind them up and wait for the charge to make itself," Dwayne added with a wink. The day had ended, and Dwayne and Paul had caught a decent amount of fish, but the second the Smith brothers came to the stage, they carried 5 trophy bass. Paul scoffed, and Brad, the bigger of the twins, turned to him in anger. "What are you laughing at? You don't have half the weight we caught." Paul egged him on. "At least my fish were caught properly, and I didn't need to cheat." He was cut off by the hard hand of Brad punching him in the mouth. Just before swinging again, Brad stopped and said, "Don't do that again." Paul winced, and Dwayne gave him a thumbs up, signaling the cops were on the way. Paul laughed in between rubbing his cheek in pain. Brad had messed up, and his brother realized it. "You idiot," he shouted. The judges were silent, and the head judge quickly decided to start the weigh-in so he could get it over and done with before the cops arrived. The other competitors all rallied behind Dwayne and Paul. "Cheaters, cheaters, cheaters," they chanted. Brad and his brother Billy withdrew, running to the car to escape the situation. But they didn't get far. The cops stopped them, arresting the 2 of them. The judges had to disqualify the twins, and Paul and Dwayne were victorious. They held their trophy proud, and the taste of victory was sweet. The head judge stared at them in anger, but there was nothing he could do. After an investigation, the twins lost everything after losing multiple court battles against other fishing competitions, and the head judge who helped them went away for a long time alongside the cheating duo. Paul and Dwayne went on vacation and spent their winnings with their families.
Only Electrolux has Smart Boost technology. For the most effective stain removal,
How the cunning catfish escaped the frying pan. The fish's long tentacles had poked up through the water surface and quickly became submerged upon sight of the team. Dally Simpson had been sitting on the riverbank since early morning, waiting for Legend to show. Legend was a catfish that the entire town, at one point or another, had attempted to catch. The fish was legendary in size and myth. Some in the town say that Legend must have been as long as a submarine, having a broad, flat girth, at least for a fish. This moment, Legend watched from a distance near a rock underneath the water as the boy placed the bait on the end of the hook and tossed the line into the water. The boy could not have been more than 15 years old. Even so, Legend learned long ago never to underestimate a fisherman. Regardless of who they were and where they came from, they would batter and fry him in their pans if he was not careful, so they would all be respected. Dally had no idea that Legend had been watching him for several days over the week. This particular week had been the town's 2024 fishing tournament. The winner received bragging rights,
Be right back.
trophy, and $15,000 in prize money. Over the week, Legend watched as a multitude of fishermen and women came and scouted out the area, each trying to outdo the other in finding a choice spot. Tired of having to outwit every man, woman, and child with a fishing pole and a dream, Legend set about putting a stop to this chase that always ended up with him hightailing it back out to deep water, at least until the furor subsided. One year, he outran a millionaire who set about winning the tournament by installing cameras on the bottom of his yacht. Luckily, the boat was too big, and as the millionaire barreled after him, the boat got stuck between two large rocks. However, that attempt was mild compared to the scuba divers who tried to capture Legend. That was a very close call where the fish missed being harpooned by the husband and wife team that nearly caught the fish of all fish. While the young couple did not walk away with the prize that year, they were one of the only people to get close enough to Legend to take a picture of him, testifying to the fact that the catfish did exist. The image of the spotted catfish's tail swimming away from the bright light of the underwater camera was plastered over every newspaper in the country for weeks. Right now, Legend remained still as he watched the boy take out his lunch to eat. A few minutes later, Legend's pal Finn swam up beside him. "I thought you said you were going to stay out of sight this competition," Finn said, swimming past Legend to see what the catfish looked at. Legend said, "I'm watching the kid because I think he came out here specifically for me. The boy has not left that spot. He's camped here the last few nights, and I don't expect him to leave until the tournament is over." "Those are the worst types," Finn said. "They're relentless." Legend shook his head, and the little tentacles in his mouth swayed in the water as he considered his options. "What are you thinking?" Finn asked. "I have to find a way to stop them," Legend said, "from coming out here every year looking for me while not getting reeled in myself." As he finished this last statement, Mullet swam by them. Mullet was a largemouth bass whose shiny scales glistened in the depths of the water. As large as Legend and the most handsome fish in the river, Mullet was Legend's frenemy. Well, more like an enemy. The two fought over Legend's prize spotted coat, and they had been at odds
I don't
since.
like much about getting old.
Legend and Finn caught
As long
sight
as
of
the
the
arthritis
largemouth
in my
bass,
left knee,
and
you
both shook
two
their
have
heads
to
at the
go to
sight
the
of the
bathroom
fish
all the time.
prancing around in the water while the men and women above were waiting to reel in anything to land. "I think I have an idea," Legend said. "Go get me that fancy coat." Finn said, "You mean the spotted one those people took your picture in?" "Of course, dimwit, the spotted one. Hurry before Mullet leaves." Finn left, returning a few minutes later with said spotted coat. "Swim a little closer to where that peacock is strutting his stuff," Legend said. Sure enough, Finn did it as told, but accidentally dropped the coat. Before Finn could retrieve it, a large line with a hook attached to it fell in the water, and every fish in sight scattered, hiding in a million nooks and crannies under the river. Everyone except Mullet, who could not take his eyes off the coat. The largemouth bass went straight for it, ignoring the hook and the men approaching in their boats. Above them, Legend and Finn hid under the rock where Dally stood with his line in the water, and heard someone yell, "The kid's got it! I think he's got the legend!" True enough, Dally had dropped the line in the water just after Finn sauntered into Mullet's view. Meanwhile, by this time, Mullet pulled the spotted coat over his scales and checked himself out in a mirror that had lain in the bottom of the river for a couple of decades. As he was about to make away with the coat, it got caught on Dally's hook. Legend, Finn, and almost every fish in the river that day watched as Dally reeled the comeliest one of them out of the water. Soon after, Legend and Finn heard the men congratulating Dally on catching Legend. At first, Dally was unsure because he could not see the whiskers, the signature mark of a catfish. Soon, Dally became swept up in the revelry of making such a catch. That and the thought of bragging rights, the 15,000 in cold hard cash, made it easy for Dally to forget the questions that nagged him about whether he actually reeled in Legend. They also listened as Mullet flipped and flopped on the rocks as he tried to scuttle, slip, or slide back into the depths of the water. Soon after, the smell of fried fish permeated the entire area. Beer bottles clinked together and loud music filled the air. For the first time since the competition, Legend had peace. Dally won the contest, reeling in the legendary Legend. The catfish rid himself of his worst rival in the river. Best of all, the town believed they had just eaten Legend. No more annual week-long hunts for Legend, and no more hiding under rocks and debris to escape from the hordes looking to make a name in the sport fishing world. Just as the last townie licked the fish grease off of their fingers, Legend swam downstream, swaying his tail in the depths of the river, and lived happily ever after.
Narrating it.
Don't try it. One bite and you're hooked.
I'm skipping the ads on this screen because
Beside a small town in the middle of nowhere, there flowed a mysterious river. A ribbon of life and magic winding its way through the scenic landscape, its waters teeming with secrets and stories untold. For as long as anyone could remember, the river had been a source of both sustenance and mystery for the people who lived alongside it. They fished its waters for food, drew inspiration from its beauty, and whispered tales of the guardian spirit who watched over its banks. A figure cloaked in shadow, with eyes as deep and mysterious as the currents that flowed beneath the surface. Among those who called the river home was a young fisherman named Ethan. With a heart full of dreams, he spent his days casting his line into the water, trying to eke out a living, and hoping to catch a glimpse of the mythical fish said to inhabit its depths. Ethan's connection to the river ran deeper than most. From the moment he was old enough to hold a fishing rod, he had felt its pull, a strange and powerful force that seemed to guide his every move. And though he could not explain it, he knew he was destined for something greater than the life that lay before him. As the years passed and Ethan honed his skills as a fisherman, he felt his destiny pressing down upon him like a heavy weight. He longed to break free from the confines of his ordinary existence, to seek out the adventure and excitement that called to him from beyond the river's banks. And so, one moonlit night, as the city slept and the stars twinkled overhead, Ethan made his decision. With nothing but a sense of purpose and a heart full of dreams, he set out into the darkness, following the winding path of the river as it led him into the unknown. For days, Ethan journeyed deeper and deeper into the wilderness, his footsteps echoing in the silence of the night. He faced countless obstacles along the way, treacherous rapids, dense undergrowth, and creatures of the wild that lurked in the shadows. But still, he pressed on, driven by a determination that knew no bounds. And then, just when he thought he could go no further, Ethan stumbled upon a clearing, a place of breathtaking beauty where the river flowed crystal clear and the air was alive with the sound of birdsong. It was there, in that enchanted place, that Ethan finally came face to face with the guardian spirit of the river. For a moment, Ethan stood transfixed, his heart pounding in his chest as he gazed upon the creature before him. And then, with a voice like the gentle rustle of leaves, the guardian spoke. "Fisherman of the river," it said, its words carrying on a breeze like a song. "You have journeyed far to find me, but what is it that you seek?" Ethan took a deep breath, his eyes shining with determination. "I seek purpose," he said, his voice steady and strong. "I seek adventure and excitement and a life worth living." The guardian regarded him for a moment, its gaze piercing through to the very core of his being. And then with a smile that lit up the darkness, it nodded. "Very well, fisherman," the guardian said, its voice filled with ancient wisdom. "Then go forth and seek out your destiny, for the river will always be with you, guiding your way and lighting your path." With those words ringing in his ears, Ethan turned and began his journey back home, his heart lighter than it had been in years. And though he knew that the road ahead would be long and full of challenges, he also knew that he was no longer alone, that the river would always be there, flowing through his veins and leading him ever onward towards the adventure that waited him beyond the horizon. As Ethan made his way back home along the riverbank, the words of the guardian spirit echoed in his mind, filling him with a newfound sense of purpose and determination. He knew that his journey was far from over, that it was only just beginning. With each step, Ethan felt a renewed sense of energy coursing through his veins.
Over 40 million people choose Kroger brand products, making them a true crowd pleaser. And we guarantee you'll love the quality or your money back. So join in,
driving him forward towards his dreams. He returned to the city with a fire burning in his heart, ready to pursue his passion for fishing with everything he had. Ethan threw himself into his craft with unwavering dedication, spending countless hours honing his skills and mastering the art of angling. He studied the behavior of the fish, learned the intricacies of the river's currents, and experimented with new techniques to improve his catch. And as he grew in skill and confidence, Ethan's reputation as a fisherman began to spread far and wide. People traveled from near and far to seek out his expertise, eager to learn from the man who had ventured into the heart of the wilderness and returned with the blessing of the river guardian. It wasn't just professional success that Ethan found on his journey, it was personal fulfillment as well. Along the way, he forged deep and lasting friendships with fellow fishermen and nature enthusiasts, sharing in their triumphs and supporting them through their struggles. As the years passed, Ethan's fame as a fisherman continued to grow, and with it, so too did his wealth. He opened his fishing charter business, leading expeditions along the river and sharing his passion with others who sought to experience the thrill of the catch. But no matter how successful he became, Ethan never forgot the lessons he had learned on his journey, that true happiness could not be found in material wealth or professional acclaim, but in the simple joys of friendship, love, and the beauty in the world around him. And so, as he cast his line out in the river once more, Ethan did so with a heart full of gratitude for the guardian spirit who had guided him on his path, a path that had led him not only to professional success, but to personal fulfillment and happiness beyond his wildest dreams.
Francis woke up. It was barely light outside. He quickly drank his coffee and grabbed his fishing equipment. Today was his day off, and he could fish to his heart's content. He walked out, his wife still asleep, and started up his car. The low hum of the engine and the morning birds were the sweetest sound as he drove to the lake just a little way from his home. As he pulled up, he smelled a strange chemical smell, but thought nothing of it, probably just a small fire set by someone. He set up his small canoe and set off into the clear blue water. The sun had now risen and peeked over the horizon, flooding the lake with light. The cool air fogged with his breath, and as he got closer to his favorite spot, he began to notice that he wasn't getting any bites, and the reason soon made itself clear. In the corner of the lake lay a dark, dirty pipe. Sludge spewed from it, the surrounding waters a dark, dirty green. Francis welled with anger. "What in the world?" he shouted. Going back up to the shore, he pulled his canoe out of the water and walked over to the pipe. It had been set up so that he couldn't move it, and the logo was etched into the plastic, the Ethic Corp. The name angered Francis even more. They dared to call themselves ethical when they were dumping into clean water. He kicked the pipe. A crunch came from it, but it stayed in place. He walked away, knowing that if he removed it, it would only be replaced almost immediately. He needed to find the root of the problem. He went home, his one free day ruined, and anger continued to rise with him as he drove home. He opened the door to his surprised wife. She was cooking breakfast for herself, but noticing he had come home, she gave it to him instead, making herself another breakfast. "Good morning, honey. Here's some breakfast. You look angry," she prodded. Francis sighed. "They've ruined Treasure Lake," he grumbled, playing with his food. His wife sat down beside him, comforting him. "Tell me what happened." Francis explained everything, and Mary was shocked. "Go to the mayor in an hour or so and get this fixed. I know how important this lake is to you," she suggested. Francis smiled, eating his food. A burning flame ignited in him. He was going to fix this, he thought to himself. After he had finished his food and had watched the morning news, he set out to the mayor's office. Since they lived in a small town, it was empty except for a few staff. No one else was there. Francis was well acquainted with the mayor, as they were childhood friends. "Hey, Michael, how's it going?" Francis asked, walking into his office. Michael sat, doing some paperwork, but he pushed it aside with a warm smile. He welcomed Francis. "Hey, long time no see, brother," Michael laughed, shaking his hand. "I want to talk about something serious," Francis said with a somber tone. He faced Michael. "The lake we used to play on and fish has been ruined by," Francis stammered, stopping his voice from turning into a shout. "By some disgusting company dumping their trash anywhere they please," he finished, letting the info soak in. "I know very well what you're talking about," Michael replied. "You do?" Francis said, shocked. "Of course I do. There's laws for a reason. Francis, this company paid good money to acquire a perfectly legal permit to do what they're doing," Michael explained. But Francis wasn't listening. After sitting through a lengthy explanation that basically beat around the bush and didn't address the actual problem, Francis stood up. "Michael, as a friend, frankly, I'm disappointed in you. But I understand you can't do much about it," Francis spat coldly, leaving the office in a huff. Michael tried calling him, but to no avail. Francis had his mind elsewhere. He eventually reached home and immediately began the research. He sat on his laptop until midnight, and even then he wanted to continue searching, but his wife didn't let him and made him rest, worried for his health. The next day, Francis woke up early. He finished research and had everything written down. He set out to put his plan in motion. He walked into the mayor's office, sat down, a smile on his face. "I want to buy the lake," Francis yelped. The mayor looked visibly shocked, taking a second to sit back. "You can't just buy a lake, Francis. Be serious," Michael stammered, frustrated. "But I can. It's perfectly legal, as long as I say that it is," Francis said whimsically. Michael sighed, began looking through his PC. He pulled up some files and looked at Francis. 100 grand is the price. You can buy it if you have the funds, Michael said coldly. That's fine. I'll be back in 2 days with the cash, Francis replied. Wait, Francis. We both know you don't have that much. Don't make any mistakes you'll regret, my friend, Michael tried, but Francis ignored his plea. Francis took a step to the next place in his plan, the news station.
Hilton is bringing you more new ways to stay than ever before. With all new places, there's all new experiences to enjoy. Hilton for the stay.
I have a lot of trust in medical professionals, so I did want to hear what my daughter's pediatrician had to say. She sat down and really took the time to go over every question that we had.
He pulled up and went inside. After talking with them for a while, he finally got them to agree to his plan, and he was off.
Hello.
They finished up, and slowly Francis' plan was working. He had been working hard all day, and his entire body was sore, but he was hopeful that this work would pay off in the end. As the news spread and the money came in, it was looking good, and in the next few days, Francis had all he needed, 100,000 in donations and counting. His plan had succeeded. He went to the mayor's office with a briefcase full of cash. He slammed it on the desk with a grin. There's your money. Give me the deed to the lake, Francis said coldly. Well, you see, the land has already been bought, Michael responded. How? Francis shouted angrily. Your elaborate plan, where you broadcast to the entire world that the lake had been ruined, you even got the local news involved and the national news. You really expected that a corporation that big wouldn't take notice and realize that you're trying to get them out? Michael explained with a glaring stare. Okay, so if I pay more, can I get it? Francis pleaded. His plan was falling through right in front of him, tears welling up, but he pushed them back. This can't be the end, he thought to himself. Well, maybe if you go to them, but I can't resell it once it's already been sold, Michael added. All right, I understand, Francis said, leaving the office emotionless. Why, he repeated over and over again in his head. His knuckles turned white from rage. Hey, honey, a voice came. His wife held his shoulder, wrapping his arm around him and holding his hand. What's up, she asked. The company bought it before us, and all this money will go to nothing, he replied. No, we can still try something. Let's go back to the news, she said, pulling Francis, who was too tired and upset to argue back. All right, let's try, he said, forcing a half smile and going to the news. After some more talk and a few broadcasts, as well as help from word of mouth, the entire town knew what was going on. After using some of the money on flyers, banners, and other things, they immediately began rioting in front of the company, not allowing anyone to come in or go out. The corporation tried to call the police, but they were on Francis's side. Since they're not doing anything illegal other than a peaceful parade on public land, there's nothing we can do, really. Good luck to you all, the police said, leaving the scene. What in the world, one employee said, shocked. The entire building was rendered useless, and the company didn't know what to do with the news of what was going on and going viral on multiple news sites and social media. The corporation had to back down, and in the following days took the fall and retracted their waste dumping, as well as donating to various charities to help clean the water that's been polluted. Everybody was happy with the outcome, and as everything concluded, Francis went to visit the lake. The greenery was coming back, and he saw teams cleaning it, removing all the putrid waste, and he smiled. He was happy. Finally, he had saved his lake. It took a while, and his efforts had been rewarded. He was finally able to fish again safely. You know your boss fired you, right? Your wife said sarcastically. Shock and embarrassment flushed on Francis's face. He had completely forgotten to go to work.
As Austin Ford slammed the tailgate of his truck, his fishing gear in his hands, he turned to the sun's warm rays that fell over his fishing club. A few white clouds peppered the sky, and a gentle breeze blew westward. Around him, many other anglers were retrieving their fishing gear, some already well on their way to the lodge that served as the entrance of Lures and Legends Fishing Club. Taking one last look around, Austin joined the fishermen in heading up. He marveled at the luck with the weather as he walked. He couldn't have asked for a more pristine set of conditions for the first day of the club's annual fishing tournament. Austin considered himself a seasoned fisherman, practically growing up with a rod in his hands, and casting was as automatic as breathing for him these days.
I think I must be the
An
only
avid
person
fisherman,
on the planet that
he
does.
still got excited by the sport,
Because it's
but the anxious
been up there a long
anticipation
time and
still
they don't
crept
hardly
in
have any
when he
use.
considered this would be his first fishing tournament. This was an
The
unusual format
individual
for a
videos
fishing
weren't
tournament,
getting very many
a
views,
two-day event.
so
Pond fishing from
I
the bank
stitched them all
was cut
together
for
and
prepared
made a
bait.
compilation
Austin
video,
had his
which is what
grandfather's
you're watching
secret
now.
recipe and was excited to see how it would
It's like
perform against the
2 hours and
competition.
24
Austin
minutes
only
long.
recently
Nobody
joined the
watches
club,
it either, but
largely
that's okay.
because of the prospect of competing in this
I
tournament.
still like
He
it.
had not shared it with his friends, but winning a fishing tournament was a lifelong dream. As he reached the doors and entered the main reception
before
area,
you say
he
hi,
quickly
that's
headed to the registration line. Not everyone in the crowd was there to participate, it seemed. Many were just mere spectators. He couldn't blame them. After all, had he not been a member, he would gladly spend a Saturday watching other fishermen practice their craft. After he registered, he headed out the back door of the lodge towards the large pond, passing by an overexcited employee who just had to tell everyone that the fish stock was ample on this fine morning. Austin shot him a halfway smile, then headed towards the water's edge where the other participants were setting up for the day. As he walked, a short, rotund man with holes in his t-shirt and a dated cap on his head rumbled past and clapped Austin on the back. Then, with the voice of a 30-year-old smoker, said, "Looks like we got a real contender this year." A laugh escaped the short man as he passed Austin.
Made to light up the room.
Austin was fine with friendly banter. After all, it was typically part of a shared enthusiasm for the sport of fishing, though the vibe he got from this guy was not particularly friendly. Either way, he shook off the sudden jarring distraction and refocused on his excitement for the tournament. This was the dream, and he would stay focused on the task. Setting up at the edge of the club's pond, Austin looked around. The rotund man was 2 anglers down, near enough to have his annoying voice heard, but probably far enough to annoy those around him and not Austin. Austin unpacked his gear, and when he was ready, cast his first line and set it on his collapsible stool, carefully watching the water. His wait wasn't a long one, as the first bite came in a mere 15 minutes. He cast his line again shortly after, and in under 10 minutes was rewarded with another catch. The fisherman to his left scored a catch too, right about the same time, but the others seemed to be coming up empty for now. It was when Austin caught his third fish another 15 minutes later that the smiles and nods turned into groans and the under-breath banter toned with resentment. Did they not consider the possibility there would be someone who knows what they are doing, or just got very fortunate, Austin wondered to himself. The older man to his right, who had yet to reel in the fish, stared him down for a minute and then, in an even tone, said, "Just my luck, parking myself here next to the star." About the same time, but the others seemed to be coming up empty for now. It was when Austin caught his third fish another 15 minutes later that the smiles and nods turned into groans and the under-breath banter toned with resentment. Did they not consider the possibility there would be someone who knows what they are doing, or just got very fortunate, Austin wondered to himself. The older man to his right, who had yet to reel in the fish, stared him down for a minute and then, in an even tone, said, "Just my luck, parking myself here next to the star of the show." That expression was not meant to be funny. "Just here for the fish, friend." Austin flashed a half smile that he hoped didn't come off as arrogant. "They seem to like my grandfather's secret recipe." He gestured to his bait, of which he had plenty. "Feel free, friend. Help yourself." The man grunted, but turned back to the water, seizing the conversation. Soon, the passive-aggressive comments started from several fishermen around, especially when Austin reeled in 2 more within the next hour. Austin had no doubt he was ahead, but he wasn't planning on stopping. It's a competition after all, he reminded himself, staving back his creeping guilty conscience. Someone has to win, and it happens to be me at the time being. He tried to suppress the part of him that really wanted to gloat. Shortly after, the older man, who Austin overheard others refer to as Tom, started acting suspiciously, wandering over to the water with what seemed like a bait bucket, although it was clearly empty. Up to this point, Tom managed to reel in only 3 fish. Then Tom turned the bucket over, holding it near the water, and started tapping on its side a little too loudly. Austin realized that Tom was trying to be noisy to spook away some of the fish. The underhanded maneuver would affect him too, but Austin got the sense that Tom didn't really care so much at this point. Looking around, Austin caught other fishermen giving Tom questionable looks. At these tournaments, maintaining a sense of tranquility and quiet was a no-brainer, since everyone benefited from fish being calm enough to approach the bait. The short man with the ripped shirt seemed to be especially peeved at Tom's actions. This was a tricky situation. If people made a thing out of this, it would only increase the noise level and would have the effect Tom seemed to be going for anyway, not to mention get them all disqualified. This needed to be handled differently, and it didn't seem like anyone was doing a thing.
It's really weird because now it's
Austin cast a few more glances around at the other fishermen who bore looks of annoyance, clearly starting to understand Tom's intentions. They met Austin's gaze, where rivalry and a degree of competitive animosity were there before. Now was only a sign of understanding that Tom was out to wreck the tournament for everyone else, probably thinking that the following day would allow him some additional luck. Austin set his rod in the fishing rod holder, making sure it was secure, and slowly stood up. The last thing he needed was to cause additional noise. As any fisherman knows, quiet is an angler's best ally. Fish are easily spooked by overstimulation, and noises, even outside of the water, send vibrations that disturb their surroundings. In other words, they would scatter and relocate to somewhere else in the pond where they felt safer. Austin slowly walked over to Tom, who was more aggressively tapping his bucket near the water surface. Austin cast a glance at the short, overweight man with the ripped shirt from earlier and cocked his head to the side, shifting his eyes towards Tom. The man may not have picked up on what Austin was planning, but he seemed to understand that his assistance in dealing with Tom was requested. He slowly placed his rod in the holder and got up. Austin looked back as he headed toward Tom. For his part, Tom became quickly aware that Austin was approaching and took a defensive stance, pretending to look away and not see Austin's approach. Keeping a normally subdued conversational tone, Austin spoke up. "Sir, I believe you are missing a catch of the day out there." Tom looked up and in Austin's direction. The short man approached from a different angle, just outside of Tom's peripheral vision. Slightly confused, Tom suddenly realized that Austin meant that something was finally biting for him, and he turned towards his rod. The timing couldn't have been more ideal. Austin came over and pointed out in the water where a fishing line began to move. Tom let out an audible gasp, losing his focus on the bucket.
Why do so many folks over 40 with type 2 start walking like this? If you take metformin and notice a sudden loss of strength in your muscles, especially your...
Within a 2-second window, he suddenly realized that the line Austin had pointed out wasn't his, but the neighboring fisherman's. But the momentary distraction was enough time for Tom to forget about the bucket in his hands and for the short man to snatch it from his grasp. Realizing what just happened, Tom whipped around, confusion, aggravation, and annoyance in his eyes. The short man was backing away with the bucket. "What the?" Give that back. Clearly, if he wasn't going to bother everyone with the
Pay
bucket,
almost
his voice would
$200 a
more
month
than
for
suffice.
internet cable. You'd
Hook,
think
line,
it
and
would
sinker,
be
old
steady.
man, said the short man with a wry smile. Classic bait and switch. Oh, I got a million place
I still got a
appropriate
lot to learn
puns.
about this.
What I don't have is patience for inadequate fishermen who are out here to wreck the experience for the rest of us. You can have the bucket back when you are heading out. Tom began to turn red and was about to start screaming when everyone's attention turned to Tom's rod dancing in the holder. Tom drew a glance at it, turning everyone's attention in the same direction. The rod and line were jerking violently as if being pulled by a large creature from below the surface. Tom hesitated for a second, but Austin stepped back, lifting his arm and extending the palm of his hand toward the rod. This is not time to be falling asleep, old-timer. You might have the catch of the day. Tom glanced around quickly, but then made his way back over to his rod and got behind it, grasping it with two hands. He then began to reel the persistent fighter on the other end. Seconds later, he drew what was easily the biggest fish of the day, much to the awe of the fishermen around him. Austin was surprised, but hoped this would alleviate the man's bitterness at his lack of success. Tom's mood seemed to change almost instantly, as he was now beaming from catching such a large fish. He also seemed to forget all about the bucket the short man took from him. Austin headed back to his spot. It was time to refocus. Somehow, Tom lucked into a good catch, so Austin needed to reset. Though he was sure he was ahead in terms of catch quantity, he checked his line, then reeled it in, replenished it with fresh bait, and cast it in. The rest of the day went quietly, and when the club's hours were winding down, a representative came by and weighed everyone's catches and recorded the total weight. Assistants came by to get the catch barrels and began to return the fish to the pond. Tom was reluctant to part with his big catch and made certain that everyone around got a glimpse of his accomplishment. Sunday brought less than ideal conditions, overcast with random showers, and it didn't strike Austin as ideal fishing conditions. However, as a lifelong fisherman but a first-time tournament participant, he decided to look at it as an advantage. He had fished in much worse weather and had some decent catches. Perhaps it would be the other, less experienced competitors who would not succeed, but he would not be among them. The tournament scores were based on the total weight of the catches of the two combined days, and while Tom and some others may have hauled in bigger fish, Austin was in the lead based upon total weight. He positioned himself, threw up his standing umbrella, pulled the hood over his head, and watched the water. Naturally, this would be a more inconvenient day. As he cast the line, Austin knew it would be hard to tell fish activity from the raindrops, but that was only a minor problem. The vibrations hitting the water were likely to make the fish wary and significantly lower his results. He might be in a position where he had to rely on his sizable haul from the previous day to get him to the top. The 6-hour window given to the competitors within which to complete the day seemed to be moving by quickly. Austin spared the occasional glance around, but did not see anyone pulling in much. He did not reel in his first fish for the day until well over 3 hours, and a second larger one about 45 minutes later.
I like the sound.
He did not see Tom or the short man with the ripped shirt, but he was certain they were not going to miss out on this day. As the tournament window drew to a close, Austin was able to reel in just one more fish, but it was the second biggest he had caught up to that time. The rain got harder throughout, but slowed towards the end, ceasing completely with about 10 minutes to go. He caught glimpses of other fishermen pulling their lines in, and anxiety began to gnaw at him, but he decided to be optimistic. Once the tournament ended, the day's tallies were collected. Every catch barrel was inspected, with assistants recording the weight just like the day before. They walked down the line of fishermen and noted all the numbers. Then all the competitors headed to the main lodge. The smell of fish and wet fishermen would likely turn most people the other way, but the anticipation Austin held had overridden all of that. The wait for the final tally seemed to take ages, but finally, a representative came out congratulating everyone on another year in the club's tournament. He said the results had been tallied and they were ready to announce the top 5. Fifth place went to a pimple-faced young man who came up on stage and awkwardly accepted his award. Fourth place went to a middle-aged woman who seemed entirely too happy to be there. Austin tried not to let his nerves get to him, but the anticipation was getting harder to deal with. Third place rocked him a bit as they brought up Tom, who signaled the size of his catch to a round of cheers. And finally, the top 2 competitors, announced the host. This was a close one, folks, with a difference of just half a pound. The second place goes to a new addition to the club. Austin immediately held his breath and told himself that to get second place in your first year was pretty great, though he wasn't sure he could repeat that kind of success next year. Dave Malik, proclaimed the announcer. Austin let out his breath. Well, I guess he was not as proficient as he thought. And shockingly, the first place also goes to a newbie, Austin Ford. Everyone started looking around as Austin realized that his name was called, but no one knew who he was. When it dawned on him, he smiled and exhaled, heading to the front of the room. He was greeted with slaps on the back along the way, fist bumps, handshakes, and a round of audible whoop. That was surreal for him, the first year, and he managed to eke out a win. He accepted his trophy on the small podium and raised it in the air, thanking everyone around. As everyone parted to go their ways, someone pushed an elbow into Austin's arm. Not bad, kid. I almost had you, though. Austin turned to see Tom smiling with his third place trophy. Next year it's mine, though. He clapped Austin on the shoulder and walked away to celebrate.
The sun rose on a seaside town. The air was fresh, and the salty tang of the sea wafted into the Hart family home. John Hart sat at the table eating his breakfast, a salmon fillet with scrambled eggs. His son Charlie sat opposite, and Sally stood watching her husband and son. "So, today's the day you two finally catch something good on your long fishing trips," Sally teased. "Ha ha, we sure will catch a whopper of a fish," John laughed. "Maybe even a shark," Charlie chimed in. The family was in good spirits. It was the weekend, and that marked the father and son's duo's weekly fishing trip. "Dear, your boat is falling apart. I know you love the old boat, but it really needs to be fixed or replaced," Sally spoke up. John winced. The boat was his late father's, and Sally and him argued about this matter in the past. "Sally, I told you that boat is strong as ever. Don't worry about it. I promise I'll get it fixed up," John said, kissing her cheek as he got up to leave. He stood in the doorway waiting for Charlie, and the two set off for the beach. As they walked through the town, the people greeted them, each of them happy to see John and Charlie. The two reached the coast where they bumped into Fred. "Hey there, Fred. How you doing?" John laughed, shaking the man's hand firmly. The two had grown up together and were childhood friends. "Tending to the old boat," Fred replied. "I take it you're going out today? Get me a nice fish while you're out there," Fred added. The two laughed and talked about days long gone as Charlie began setting up the boat. He was a strong young man who had taken after his father in every way. In no time, the Sea Serenade was ready to sail. Charlie stood at the stern, waiting for his father. After saying goodbye to his friend, John boarded the boat. The sea was calm and slowly lapped under them. Charlie raised the anchor and they set sail. The boat had a small engine, but they used the sails whenever the wind was in their favor. "What do you think we'll catch today?" Charlie asked his dad. Maybe a few salmon or a tuna," John replied as they set up their rods and reels as the water became deeper. Charlie's rod moved. "I got one," he shouted. "Set the hook and reel it in slowly," John advised. Charlie did as told and set the hook perfectly. The fish struggled for a few minutes, but Charlie won in the end, catching a small fish. He set it aside for later and set up his rod again. The time passed quickly, and it was the afternoon. They had a nice catch that would last them until their next trip, and also enough to give to friends and family. "Let's head back soon," John said, putting away the last of the fish. They stowed their rods and reels and began heading back to the shore. They were an hour or so away when the sky rumbled. A storm was coming, and they sped up, trying to reach the shore before it reached them, but the clouds came in too fast. The sea changed quickly. John hurriedly began bringing in the 2 coolers of fish, placing them under the seat. The wind was strong, and it was helping them reach faster speeds, but then the sail gave out. A huge tear had ripped straight through it, and it began flapping around in the air. John secured the sail, and they kept going forward. The engine is enough, John thought to himself. The waves crashed against the hull of the boat. The salty drops burned her eyes as the storm reached its peak. Nightfall was near, as they could see the lights of the dock in the distance. Suddenly, a horrible sound came from behind, the sound of the engine failing. John turned, trying to start it again, but to no avail. The engine was blown, as well as the sail. They were adrift in a storm. "Dad, they'll come save us, don't worry," Charlie
2
said,
hours and
noticing
10
his dad's pale face. "No, son, this storm, they can't see us out here. Even if we see the light, there's no way to alert them," John said coldly. He paced around the boat, thinking, his mind worrying and his clothes wet with the rain. Meanwhile, as this was happening, the storm had reached the town. The townspeople had packed up their shops and were heading back to their homes. The only one left at the dock was Fred. He was doing some last-minute tweaks to his boat and making sure it wouldn't drift away in the storm. Once his boat was secure, he looked around to see if the Sea Serenade had returned to the dock, but it wasn't there. Checking the time, he thought, "They'll come in soon, so I might as well wait for them a bit." Fred held his umbrella and stood waiting for a while, but once he realized that John and Charlie were not coming back anytime soon, he called the others. The townspeople all came out to help. They walked around the shore to see if the Sea Serenade was anywhere to be found, but after half an hour they found nothing. They solemnly watched the waves to see if anything was there. Fred was determined to spot the boat, but the storm made it hard. "What's that?" A shout came from the water. A man was holding a rod with no reel on the side, and the name Charlie was etched into it. "That's Charlie's rod," Fred shouted. Fred's heart dropped as he thought of the worst-case scenario. "Why are we here just standing around?" he shouted, grabbing the rod. "John and Charlie are missing at sea. I'm leaving now to get them. If anyone wants to help me, you're free to come, but only if you're adept at seafaring." As he boarded his boat, a voice came from the crowd. "Fred, let's wait a bit more. It isn't very late. They might come back on their own." Fred ignored the voice and untied his boat. It was much bigger than John's and had a better engine. The boat even had navigation lights, unlike many others in the small town. Fred headed out on his own. There was no one else brave enough to go, and they all watched as he left the dock. As Fred left, John and Charlie were starting to lose hope. The sun had fully set. The rain had made them cold, and Charlie was falling ill. The night sky was covered with clouds, and the storm continued. John sat in the middle of the boat rowing. "Son, hold on, okay? We're going to get back safe," John shouted. His hands were blistering from fighting with the current. He had made little to no progress, but his fatherly instinct refused to let his body give in. He kept rowing even after his muscles couldn't move anymore. Charlie stood up. "Dad," he shouted, pointing to the shore. A light burned through the rain, and it was heading towards them. "Fred," John whispered. "Charlie, whistle," John shouted, and the two whistled as loud as they could. A horn could be heard in response. Fred had heard them. He sailed towards the duo after he spotted the small boat in the middle of the ocean. "You guys look battered," Fred laughed. "This sea beat us up until we thought we couldn't make it home," John laughed. Charlie climbed into the boat and sat shivering. The rain had taken away all his energy. The Sea Serenade was tied to Fred's boat, and they turned back to shore. Luckily, nothing else happened along the way, and the three made it back safely. The townspeople were waiting anxiously. The second they saw the three step onto the dock, the crowd cheered. Fred and John held up Charlie, who was treated to a warm soup and fresh clothes. The storm slowly faded away during the night. In the morning, John fixed up the boat and made full repairs to it, investing in a new engine and a new sail. The fish they caught was given to Fred as a gift, but he refused, only taking one salmon as he usually did. Sally was a mess after what had happened, but she was happy to have her son and husband back safe. John and Charlie joked about what had happened, but were a lot more thankful for the life they'd been given. The sea was rough, and a fisherman named Albert docked in a sheltered cove at a small island. He needed to settle down and rest for a night. After securing his boat, he walked down the worn wooden dock that was battered from years of wear. He filled up his barrels of water and bought provisions. He decided to sleep under the stars to save money. Taking to a small space against a tree on the shore, he watched the waves, and he saw a small boy attempting to make a raft out of old timber. The frail boy kept falling through his botched raft, and Albert got up. "Let me fix that for you, child," he said. He spent the next few minutes putting together a somewhat stable raft, and the boy yelped in excitement. The boy didn't speak, and Albert decided to stay with him a few more minutes before standing up to leave. In Albert's mind, this child wasn't his responsibility, and even though it was dark, he walked back to his cozy spot in the sand, only to hear footsteps behind him. The young boy had followed him, walking unsteadily. "You're too tired. Rest," Albert said, and gave the boy his cloak to sleep under. The night breeze was chilly. Albert propped himself against the tree and watched the boy toss and turn as he slept. Albert spent the night pondering what to do. In the morning, when he went out, the boy kept following him. Albert bought him food. While eating, the boy said meekly, "Take me with you." Albert turned, shocked.
Kroger customers love the app. Why? Because they can find digital coupons worth over $600 in savings every week and earn fuel points to save up to $1 per gallon at the pump. Save with the app today. Kroger, fresh for everyone.
With U.S. Bank, you get business checking options with no monthly maintenance fee.
"Why?" The boy replied, "I don't have anyone here." Albert understood, and he decided to help this boy as much as he could. The little money he had left was only enough to buy a few more meals on the island, so he decided to leave the next day. Albert took the boy to a tailor, creating a small cloak and a set of clothes. Albert discovered the islanders knew the boy and had cast him aside like a stray dog to live or die on his own. Albert felt their eyes constantly burning into his back. Albert brought the boy on board, and while the boy felt uneasy on the new surface, his eyes lit up in excitement as the waves lapped under them. "Cool, ain't it?" Albert laughed. "Let's set sail." The boy shouted excitedly. Albert chuckled. The joy of the sea called to him as well, and Albert saw a reflection of himself in the young boy. The next few days were rough. Albert named the boy Archie and began teaching him to fish, but the sea was merciless, and each day etched this into Archie's mind. During this time, Archie began to speak more freely. The once heavy eyes that only knew sadness began to understand kindness. Albert cooked up the fish he had caught, giving Archie a hearty meal. The boy smiled, happy to have somewhere safe to feel free. As the days went by slowly, turning into a blur, Archie learned to read and write. He had mastered fishing and now handled all the catching, cooking, and maintaining the ship. He had become stronger and was now taller than Albert. Archie yearned to know about his childhood, but every time he asked, Albert changed the subject, not wanting to bring up bad memories. Archie seemed to have forgotten his past, and as he became a young man, he never asked, only thinking that he had been adopted by Albert. One day, Albert fell sick, and Archie grew worried, not knowing what to do. He noticed a small island nearby. He remembered Albert had told him to avoid this island and to not go there under any circumstances. With Albert barely hanging on,
Archie dismissed these thoughts and headed straight to the town, holding the lifeless fisherman in his arms. "I need a doctor now," Archie shouted as he walked around. People looked at him strangely. Their eyes burned a hole in his back, and he wondered why this town was so weird. An old lady pointed to the hospital, only for him to be turned away at the door. They refused to serve him. Even after offering all his money and the boat, they still told him to leave. Angered, he left with nowhere to go. He tried finding a hotel, but all were either full or refused to serve him. He felt fury and his body ached from staying up all night. He sat at the beach nursing the fisherman who peacefully passed in Archie's arms. Archie wailed that night. His father figure had left him all alone, and it was this town that refused to save him. Albert managed to get out some final words that sparked Archie's memory, and everything returned to him. He remembered the town and his past life. As he buried Albert, he smelled something from the sea. Looking up, he instantly knew something bad was coming. The clouds in the sky were not normal, and when he looked at the sea from the port, he saw the waves building. "A terrible storm is coming," he shouted at the people in the stalls and the shops that just moments ago refused to help him. "Young man, what did you just say?" an old man inquired. "Everything points to a terrible storm heading your way, and I would say you have until nightfall before it hits," Archie spoke. After years of being at sea under Albert's tutelage, sleeping in different places, different countries, he had grown to know the sea like the back of his hand. The people looked at him astonished. "Young man, you must know we banished you when you were younger. You're the spitting image of your father," a man replied. "Why tell us when you can just let the storm destroy this town?" "I don't want anyone to get hurt," Archie said. Archie got to work securing his boat against the storm and secured the islanders' boats as well. As rain began, he helped people close up their shops and move their stuff. After everyone was safe, he stood watching the sea, and the rain left him cold and wet. Someone called out to him to join them. He was welcomed into a home, given dry clothes, and they waited out the storm. The storm came hard, and it was the strongest storm that Archie had seen. The streets were flooded and some people's homes destroyed. Archie stepped out after the storm and tried helping as much as he could. The islanders came up to him, and the old men and women that knew him came to apologize. "Boy, we left you with nothing all those years ago. You were an orphan. Why? I don't know why, but thank you for helping us. We don't know the sea well, and we couldn't have known a storm that big was coming," the town mayor proclaimed, tears rolling down his cheek. Archie comforted him with a warm smile. "Don't worry, I don't expect anything," he said. "This is from your late mother," the mayor said, handing him a box. Inside the box lay a pearl necklace, 2 rings, as well as a watch and pictures of his mother and father. "Archie was your name given by your mother," the man added. The memories returned to Archie, and he choked up discovering Albert had known his real name. Heading back to his boat, and as he climbed up, a young boy stood behind him, his clothes tattered. "Can I come with you, hero?" the boy asked. "Sure," Archie replied, smiling warmly. He helped the boy up onto the boat and gave him clothes and food just as Albert had done all those years ago. "Let's set sail." "What's your name?" Archie asked the boy. "Albert," he replied. Archie nodded and turned the boat to the sea. "Albert," Archie said softly, as the wind steered them to new adventures.
For memories that last and produce that lasts longer too. Only Frigidaire's crisp.
What they didn't know, Peter had been scheming, and this would be the end of their lifelong friendship. The day broke in a town called Desert Valley. The sun was bright, and the fresh smell of spring was in the air. Peter, Joe, and Sam were walking to their fishing spot deep in the mountains. A crater lake lay there. It was their favorite spot, and they'd been going since childhood. "How's life for you guys?" Peter spoke up as they trekked the dirt road, each holding their fishing gear in hand. Same old, Joe laughed, and they chuckled to themselves before going silent, having little escape from their harsh reality. The town was falling apart, people were leaving, and it wasn't like it used to be. The local economy was suffering due to a severe drought, and they were beginning to worry. "We're here," Sam announced as he walked towards the lake. The lake level was low as it had been drying up, but there was still enough water to fish. The trio began fishing, and soon enough, they had caught a few fish. "Come here, guys," Joe shouted to the other two. They ran to him and saw his latest catch lying on a stretch of ground recently exposed by the receding water. Something shiny lay on the ground next to the fish. "You know what that is?" Joe asked with a sly smile on his face as Sam picked it up. Holding it, he realized, "It's gold," he shouted ecstatically. "For real?" Peter asked. The heaviness of it left no doubt. They each thought of what they could do with this before Peter pocketed it. "Look, there's definitely more, so let's fish in this area and see if we can find more," Peter explained. "No, that's not how it works. We need to get some gold pans and find it in that way," Sam added. They agreed to get the gold tested and invested in some gold mining equipment, just a few pans and various other items. The group left at dawn the next day and spent it panning for gold. As they had thought, they found a few more nuggets. "This is crazy. If we keep up at this pace, we'll be rich. Then maybe this town can be fixed up," Joe laughed. Sam smiled, but Peter was quiet. He had a stern look on his face. "Hey, what's up with Peter?" Joe asked Sam. "No idea. He's probably just lost in thought," Sam replied. They found a lot of gold and went home with hopes for more. The weekend was over, and they had to go back to work, so they each took their findings and said goodbye to each other. But what they didn't know, Peter had been scheming, and this would be the end of their lifelong friendship. The next weekend came, and Sam and Joe couldn't get a hold of Peter. They walked to the lake to see if he was there. As they got closer, they could hear shouting and voices, and to their dismay, the entire lake had been gated off. Peter stood next to the lake. Large machines were everywhere, and the water looked murky. "Peter," Sam yelled, "what's the meaning of this?" Peter turned to them and looked angry. "Make them leave now," Peter shouted, and two armed men walked over. They motioned for Sam and Joe to move off of the property, but Joe stood his ground. "What do you mean we have to leave?" Joe shouted. "Private property," the guard spoke coldly. Joe and Sam backed off, leaving the area. As they walked down the mountain, dozens of thoughts rushed through their minds. But the biggest question, how was Peter able to do this in just 5 days? Meanwhile, Peter was still on the mountain. He was pacing around. His plan had gone perfectly. Sam and Joe could do nothing, and he was making more money than he'd ever made in his life. "Boss, who were those men? They seemed to know you," one of the guards asked curiously. "Nope, never seen them in my life," Peter replied. He turned back to his little operation that he had set up over the last 5 days. He knew that Sam and Joe would be busy at work, so he had gone behind their back and bought the entire plot of ground the lake was on. He had bought it cheap from someone that needed the money, and then quit his job. He hired men to mine the gold, bought machinery. It was all perfect, he thought to himself, but he didn't know it wouldn't last for long. Sam and Joe were really upset at being betrayed by a lifelong friend, but the purchase was legal, and there was nothing they could do. "You know, there's a spot up on the mountain that Peter's never been to," Sam said. "The small lake?" Joe asked. "I totally forgot that it existed," he added. The two had nothing better to do, so they set off to the mountain again, but this time they followed another route. Climbing up the rough and steep mountain was a difficult hike, but when they reached the secluded lake, it was full of water, and the greenery had continued to grow. "Why is it so green?" Joe said. "There's a spring that feeds this," Sam said, pointing to the right. The lake was secluded, and they began fishing. They caught a few and started a small fire, cooking the fish. After they ate, and as they were leaving, Joe pulled out his pan. Scooping up a panful of gravel, he panned, and as the contents settled at the bottom, there lay 2 decent-sized nuggets. "Look at this," Joe said, calling Sam over. The two smiled and immediately spent the rest of the day and well into the night panning for gold. Their wives got upset the second they got home, but after hearing the full story, they understood. They had each found a panful of gold. They spent the next few days planning their revenge. They spent night and day panning, and the gold was piling up. They stored it safely in a lockbox, and once they had enough, they bought the land secretly. They didn't spend their money.
The Z63 is a powerhouse.
The diseases are still there. They're not gone. And at the end of the day,
On machines and workers, they did the panning themselves.
I think I'm going to
And
have
as
to
the
call
weeks went
Spectrum
by,
Internet.
they had amassed a decent amount of wealth. They decided to check up on Peter to see how he was doing. They walked down the mountain and they heard nothing. It was quiet as they neared the large lake. It had dried up due to the heavy mining. The machines lay still and no one was there. The gates were wide open as if someone had abandoned the place. Joe and Sam looked around and saw Peter digging in the dirt. They watched him from afar and they left quietly. He brought it on himself, but it hurts to see him like this, Joe said. Sam agreed, and they decided to go to Peter's house the next day. He was home, and he let them in quietly and apologized. "I'm sorry, guys. Please forgive me. I saw the gold and it went to my head," Peter cried. "The town seized my assets after the lake went dry, and I damaged the water supply. I have nothing. Nothing," he sobbed. Sam extended a hand outward. Holding Peter up, he said, "It's okay, brother. You don't have to suffer anymore. Peter, we can forgive you, but we need to restore the town's water supply," Joe said. Sam and Joe paid Peter's fines in exchange for 2/3 ownership of the large lake. They built a new water system for the town, which did not depend upon the large lake, and donated money to local charities and businesses so the town could be restored. They developed a plan to mine the gold in a sustainable manner. Sam and Joe held Peter responsible for his actions and required him to spend a significant portion of his profit improving the town. Eventually their friendship healed and they resumed fishing together. Normally the pier was bustling with activity even in the early morning hours, but today hardly anyone was around. Typically, fishermen would line up alongside the edge, casting their rods into the Pacific Ocean and spending the morning lost in banter, retrieving the occasional catch. But today, it was just the cries of seagulls circling overhead in the waves, slapping the underside of the pier more aggressively. Somewhere far off the coast, thunder rumbled, and the occasional lightning bolt escaped the sky. The incoming storm was just hours away from making landfall. Even the most avid fishermen decided to skip today's Saturday pastime and avoid showing up so close to the storm, but Aaron and Sam were not going to be swayed. They both pulled up to the pier around the same time and unloaded their fishing accessories, heading over to the pier to set up. "It's a ghost town out here," Sam commented. "That storm is not even here yet, but all those guys run off to hide, I guess." "Good luck to them finding something better to do," Aaron mused sarcastically. "Here we are, two guys who've been out here every Saturday of fishing season for more than 2 decades. This is just our Saturday morning at this point. It's just what we do." Sam smiled as he set up his fishing gear. "Probably will be accused of whistling up a gale to scare everyone else off, especially if the catch is good." Aaron rolled his eyes. "I can't believe that old whistling superstition is still making its rounds. It's so foolish. If you whistle, a storm comes. What a load." He got his line ready to cast as the gust of wind came through and the waves became rougher. Just like women or bananas on boats being bad luck. Someone just came up with it, and a bunch of fishing fools took it as gospel, blaming random nonsense for their misfortunes. Sam chuckled. "Yep, but really, they just think the storms will scare the fish away." Aaron looked up. "Well, they do scare everyone else away. Just look around. When the rain is heavy and the winds are high, the smaller ones will scatter, it's true, but that's when the big ones come to bite," Sam responded. "Maybe it's just me, but stormy weather seems like a great time to reel in the big guys." "You expect to reel in a few 15-pounders today then, Sam?" Aaron asked, laughing. "That would be a great way to prove your beliefs." That sounds a lot like a challenge.
Now,
Sam
this
looked
is
up at
something that
Aaron
always
as
puts
a
me
rogue
on
breeze
tilt.
passed between
The
the
guy's
two.
holding his
Little
spinning
wager on
rod
who pulls
upside
up the
down.
biggest catch in the face of
And
the
a
storm.
surprising number
Aaron's
of
eyes
people
lit
do
up.
that.
A bet would make the day on an empty pier with a friend
Hold
more
it
fun.
upside down
$100
so
sounds
you
like
can
a fair
reel
bet
with
to
your
me.
right hand.
You're on, and shot back
But
and continued
almost all
setting up his
spinning
equipment.
reels
Now
have
more
a
enthused to
reversible
get this
handle. You
fishing
can
show
put
on
the
the road. A few
handle
minutes
over
later,
on the
both
other
anglers
side,
cast
and
their
it can
fishing
hang
lines
down
in the
like
water
it's supposed
and
to, and
stood
you can
silently
reel with the
observing the storm in the distance.
It's very
The dark
few
clouds
spinning
were getting
reels that
closer and
don't
the
have
thunder was more prominent
aren't
than before.
reversible.
They would see the occasional walker along the pier and a couple of bicyclists looking to squeeze in a ride before the weather turned really sour. Other than that, no fishermen showed up today. I heard there would be big fish biting today since the storm scared away the little ones, Aaron remarked with a smirk, looking over at Sam and winking. Sounds like there wasn't a lot of truth to that whole room. Aaron cut off suddenly and turned his attention to his rod. Sam looked over to see Aaron's line tugging tightly and the rod bending at the top as Aaron tried to get his wits about him and refocus his attention. Sam's eyes widened. Did he just will good fishing fortunes into existence for his friend? So much for mocking fishing superstitions. He preferred that he got the catch of the day, but that was still a bit too surreal and timely to be happening. Oh, I got something big here. This one's a fighter. Oh man, you might have been right about big biters in the storm, Aaron said loudly, struggling to keep his violently thrashing line from being yanked from his grasp. He chanced reaching for the reel, but as soon as he took one hand off, he almost lost grip on his rod entirely. He gripped with both hands again and looked over to Sam. A little help? It took Sam a couple of seconds to realize Aaron was asking for assistance, at which point he quickly set his line down in the rod holder and stepped over to help his friend. When Sam gripped the rod with both hands, Aaron began to turn the reel as quickly as he could. The wind was picking up from the ocean, and the salt water particles were being flung right into their faces. Neither had glasses or a hood on, and their hands were occupied gripping Aaron's fishing rod. They turned their eyes downward as they held tight and Aaron turned the reel. Something broke the surface of the water attached to the hook at the end of the fishing line. While they were both looking away to keep the wind and water out of their eyes and couldn't look at what it was they were pulling up, the creature attached was clearly a big catch. Sam chanced to glance, but all he saw was a thrashing silhouette as he was forced to turn his eyes back down and away from the wind and the rain that was now starting to fall harder. Aaron kept turning the reel as both men hung onto the fishing line, when all of a sudden all the pressure disappeared and the rod snapped back up in the air like a whip with a terrifying whooshing sound. With sudden and unexpected relief, both Aaron, Sam, and Aaron's fishing rod were sent flying backward, toppling over onto the wet boardwalk in a heap. They landed and looked at each other, knowing that the big catch managed to break the fishing line and had now escaped back into the ocean. "Oh, come on," Aaron yelled over the wind. "That's just my luck. That'll be the last time I try to save money on fishing lines." Sam got up and shook himself off, though the hardening rain made him just as wet all over again. He pulled his hood on. "Well, for a moment there you had a bigger catch than me. Not sure where that puts our bet." He smiled and looked beyond Aaron, with the smile suddenly disappearing from his face. "Oh, no, no," Sam yelled, and rushed past Aaron back in the direction of his equipment. Aaron was confused, so he turned around as he worked his way to his feet. Sam was practically diving after his rod, which it seems dislodged from its holder with the wind, falling backward and being twisted as the line was dragging it into the ocean. It was ready to slide under the pier's ocean-facing rails, but got caught on the reel handle, though that catch was ready to slip away. Aaron instinctively scrambled toward that direction as well, as if two men gripping at the fishing line would have had a better chance of letting it slip away. Sam was there first and caught the tail end of the rod moments before the force of the pull yanked it down. He quickly got another hand on it and pulled it towards himself. Aaron was there, quickly joining in. As Sam pulled back the fishing rod, Aaron pulled at the line, which seemed to be resistant to coming out of the water, being held by the oncoming rounds of waves. Sam got his bearings and used a reel to pull the line back in. When it came up, both men stood up and leaned on the pier rails, trying to catch their breath. "Well, I'd say you win that bet," Aaron said through an uneasy smile. "Wait, what?" Sam looked confused. The way I see it, I was in the lead till the line broke, but then you catching that line before your expensive equipment was lost to the storm and the waves, well, I'd say that was a more impressive catch than my failed one, Aaron explained. Sam laughed. Come on, man. I can't take your money for that. Another gust of wind slammed the coast and the rain intensified again. I think we got all the action we could handle trying to brave this storm. Aaron nodded his head in agreement. Listen, how about we split the difference? We can call off the $100 bet, but we pack our stuff and call the only thing being lost is half of my line a success on a day like this. How about we hit the breakfast place a couple blocks down instead and wait out some of this rain? You had the catch of the day, so you know what? Breakfast is my treat. Sam grinned. I'll take the win, and who am I to turn down a free breakfast?
Made to light up the room.
Thanks for watching my first live stream. I'm getting ready to shut her down. 2 hours, 29 minutes, and 15 seconds. Stop streaming.